Story 1. My parents sabotaged my university application to protect my sister's feelings, so I made sure to ruin everything they valued. I am an 18-year-old boy who just finished high school. My goal was always clear. I wanted to enter a university outside the state, a prestigious place that would challenge me and distance me from the drama that always surrounds my home. Since I was little, I was fascinated by science, especially engineering. I had worked very hard to build my path towards a career in electrical engineering. My academic record was solid, and I even got summer internships that strengthened my application. Everything seemed to be on track until something strange happened last year. I began the application process for several universities, including one of the most prestigious on the West Coast. It was my dream university, a goal that had motivated me for years. I spent months perfecting my essay, making sure it stood out, and my grade point average was more than enough to compete for a spot. Even my friends who also applied were excited for me. However, there was a constant shadow: my older sister. My sister, who is 2 years older than me, was always my parents' favorite. No matter how many mistakes she made or how much she neglected her education, they always excused her. She failed several classes during high school, although my mother always defended her, saying that she had learning difficulties. The reality was that she preferred to spend her time at parties and on social media. I never cared much until I started to notice how my parents became more tense every time I talked about my university plans. At first, I thought it was simply the pressure of the moment. After all, sending applications to universities is stressful for any family. But there was something more, a subtle discomfort that I could not ignore. My mom and my dad avoided the topic when I talked about my dreams, and whenever I mentioned my dream university, they quickly changed the conversation. When the universities started to send their responses, I received news from several institutions to which I had applied. I was accepted into many of them, which was a great relief, but there was something strange. I never received any news from my favorite university. At first, I thought it was normal. Maybe they were taking longer to process the applications, but as the days passed, I began to feel anxious. My friends who had also applied were already receiving responses, even rejections. I, however, had not a single sign of life from that school. I decided to investigate. I checked the online admissions portal, hoping to find some updated status. To my surprise, there was no record of my application. I checked my emails several times, even in the spam folder, but there was nothing related to that university. I felt that something was not right, but I could not imagine what was happening. Finally, after days of uncertainty, I called the university admissions office. The person who answered was kind, but their words left me frozen. They told me that my application had been withdrawn shortly after submitting it. At that moment, my brain could not process what I was hearing. I explained to them that this was not possible, that I never withdrew my application, but they insisted that they had received an email requesting the withdrawal with all my correct information, and that as a result, my application was deleted from the system. I felt dizzy. How could that be possible? I hung up the phone in a state of shock. The first thing I thought of was my sister. She had always been insecure about me, and although she rarely admitted it, she was jealous that I was doing well in school. I wondered if she could have done something like that to sabotage me, but after a while, I realized that this did not make sense. She did not have access to my email or my application information. If it was not her, then there was only one possibility: my own parents. That idea was terrifying, but I had to confirm it. That night during dinner, I brought up the subject. I told them what I had discovered and observed their reactions carefully. My mother tried to act surprised, while my dad focused on his food, avoiding eye contact. When I directly asked them if they knew anything about the withdrawal of my application, there was a long silence. Finally, my dad looked up and said with a cold, direct voice, "We did it for your sister's sake." My ears were ringing. Had I heard that correctly? For my sister's sake? What the hell did that mean? My mom, nervous, tried to explain. "Your sister has been struggling a lot. Comparing herself to you only makes things worse for her. We thought that if you got into that university, it would be devastating for her self-esteem." I could not believe what I was hearing. My own parents sabotaged my future, my dream, to protect my sister's feelings. It was as if they had given me an emotional slap in the face. I could not even scream. I was too stunned to react. That night, I locked myself in my room. I could not think. I could not sleep. I only felt rage, a fire that grew in my chest. My own parents betrayed me to favor someone who never made an effort to improve. At that moment, I swore that I would not let them get away with it. After that revelation, I locked myself in my room, feeling a mixture of disbelief and rage. How could my own parents, the people who were supposed to support me, sabotage me in that way? My dream of attending that university was not just a passing fantasy. It was something I had worked for years, and now it was all destroyed because my parents wanted to protect my sister's feelings. It was absurd. That night, while trying to calm down, I realized something important. If they could act behind my back and ruin my plans without even thinking twice, I could play that game too. But unlike them, I was not going to do something impulsive. If I wanted to get revenge, I had to think carefully and strike where it hurt them the most, and I knew exactly where their weak point was. My parents had always been materialistic. They greatly valued appearances and what others thought of them. Although we were not millionaires, they had inherited a fairly large house and some money from my paternal grandparents, and they loved to show off their lifestyle. They had friends in the community, and they cared a lot about being seen as an exemplary family. My mother constantly boasted about how she supported her children and how well she was raising her family. My father, for his part, enjoyed his reputation as a man of principle. If I was going to return the blow, I was going to attack those things that they valued so much. Before taking any action, I needed to confirm exactly how they had withdrawn my application. I knew that they had access to my email because when I was younger, I used to use my father's computer. I probably never logged out of my account when I got my own laptop. If my suspicion was correct, they simply entered my email, found my application information, and sent the email to withdraw it. It was a dirty and calculated act, and the idea that my own parents were capable of something like that infuriated me even more. I took my laptop and started checking my email account. I was looking for any trace of the withdrawal of my application, but as expected, there was nothing. They must have deleted the emails after sending the message. However, there was one thing they could not erase: the activity history in my account. I entered the security settings and checked the recent logins. There it was. 2 weeks after submitting my application, there was a login from my father's computer just the day the university received the email requesting the withdrawal. That was the proof I needed. There were no longer any doubts. They did it. I felt betrayed, but that betrayal also gave me a clarity that I had never had before. I no longer cared what they thought of me. My only concern was to make sure they paid for what they had done. My paternal grandparents had always been a neutral figure in my life. Although they did not intervene much in my parents' decisions, I knew that they loved me and that they cared about my well-being. If anyone could understand the seriousness of this situation, it was them. Also, they were the people who ultimately controlled the assets that my parents valued so much. I decided to visit them the next day. I did not tell my parents where I was going because, frankly, I no longer felt the need to inform them of anything. When I arrived at my grandparents' house, they greeted me with a warm smile. I sat with them in the living room, and after a moment of silence, I told them everything. I explained how I had worked hard to apply to my dream university, how my parents had withdrawn my application without my knowledge, and how they justified everything by saying it was for my sister's sake. As I spoke, I could see my grandfather's expression harden. My grandmother, who was normally calm and compassionate, seemed about to cry. "This is unacceptable," my grandfather said finally. His voice was low but firm, and I knew that he was furious. "They have no right to interfere in your future like that." My grandmother hugged me and told me that she was very sorry for what had happened, but that they would not allow something like that to go unpunished. My grandparents were older people, but they had an energy and a determination that inspired me. It was then that my grandfather suggested something that would change everything. "We are going to fix this," he said. "Not only are we going to help you get where you deserve to be, but we are also going to make sure they learn a lesson they will never forget." I did not understand exactly what he meant at that moment, but I trusted him. I knew that my grandparents had resources and that if they were on my side, I could face anything. During the following weeks, my grandparents began to move their pieces. The first thing they did was to contact a lawyer to review how they could adjust their wills. It was obvious that my parents expected to inherit the house and a significant portion of my grandparents' money, but that was about to change. Meanwhile, they also helped pay my expenses to make sure that I could attend a good university, even if it was not the one of my dreams. But most importantly, we decided to keep everything a secret. My parents had no idea what was happening, and that ignorance was key to the plan. If they wanted to play dirty, I could do it too. For weeks, I kept calm at home. I did not give my parents any reason to suspect that I knew what they had done or that I was planning something. If I was going to carry out this revenge, I needed everything to happen in a calculated manner and at the right moment. Meanwhile, my grandparents continued to work in the background, making sure that when the blow came, it would be devastating. The first big move came from them. They decided to call a family meeting. It was something rare since, although we were a close family, we never did that type of formal meetings. My parents, of course, accepted the invitation with enthusiasm. They thought it would be an opportunity for my grandparents to announce something important, maybe something related to the inheritance, and they were excited. On the other hand, I knew that this meeting would be the beginning of the chaos. My grandparents had carefully planned every detail, and I was ready for my moment. The meeting was at my grandparents' house. We arrived early, and everything seemed normal at first. My grandparents greeted us with smiles, and the rest of the family began to arrive shortly after. The atmosphere was friendly, but there was a subtle tension in the air as if my grandparents were waiting for the perfect moment to drop a bomb. When everyone was gathered, my grandfather stood up and asked for our attention. I knew him well enough to know that, although his tone was calm, what he was about to say was anything but insignificant. "We want to talk about something very serious," he began. "We have made some important decisions about the future of this family, and we want to be transparent with all of you." My parents, who were sitting on the other side of the table, looked at each other with a mixture of curiosity and anticipation. They knew that something big was coming, but they had no idea what was about to happen. My grandfather continued explaining how he and my grandmother had been reviewing their wills and making some changes. He explained that they wanted to make sure that their legacy benefited those who truly deserved it and who demonstrated integrity and respect for family values. Then he looked directly at my parents. "We have been reflecting on some things that we were told recently," he said, "and we cannot ignore what we have learned." At that moment, my grandfather asked me to speak. I felt a knot in my stomach, but I also knew that this was my moment. I stood up and told everything that had happened. I explained how my parents had sabotaged my university application, how they had accessed my email without my permission, and how they justified everything by saying it was for my sister's sake. As I spoke, I could feel the looks of disbelief and anger from other family members directed at my parents. When I finished, there was a long silence in the room. My mother tried to speak, but my grandfather interrupted her with an authority that he rarely showed. "Is what he is saying true?" he asked. His eyes were fixed on them, and there was no room for excuses. My father, who normally had an answer for everything, stammered something about how they only wanted the best for the family and how the pressure was too much for their daughter, but that did not impress anyone. It was then that my grandfather revealed what he had been planning. He said with a devastating calm that he had decided to disinherit my parents. All the assets, including the house, the money, and the investments, would now be destined exclusively to me and, to a lesser extent, to other family members who deserved it. "What you did was inexcusable," my grandfather said. "If you are willing to sabotage your own son's future to protect her ego and your daughter's insecurities, you do not deserve anything we built with so much effort." My parents looked shocked. My mother began to cry, saying that this was not fair, while my father tried to negotiate, but my grandparents did not give in. They made it clear that there was no going back. From that moment on, my parents were not only out of the inheritance, but would also lose the emotional and financial support that my grandparents had always given them. What made all this even sweeter was how the rest of the family reacted. Many of them, who had always suspected that my parents were not as perfect as they tried to appear, took my side. Some even directly confronted my parents, accusing them of being selfish and manipulative. When I finally returned home that night, the atmosphere was unbearably tense. My parents did not say a word during the car ride, but I could feel their anger and frustration. When we arrived, my mother exploded. "How could you do this to us?" she shouted. "We are your parents. Everything we did was for your good and your sister's. But for me, they no longer had power." I looked directly at them and said, "You betrayed me first. Now you are facing the consequences of your actions. Do not ask me to feel guilty." Then I went to my room, leaving my parents dealing with the reality of what they had lost. After that meeting, things at home took a dark and tense turn. My parents, who had always been accustomed to being in control, seemed to slowly crumble as they realized that they had lost something irrecoverable, the support and inheritance from my grandparents. What had begun as a betrayal towards me to protect my sister's ego was now turning into their own nightmare. During the days that followed, they barely spoke to me. My mother, who used to insist on family dinners, began to avoid them completely. My father spent more time locked in his office, probably trying to find a solution, but I had no intention of softening things. They had made a selfish decision, and now they were paying the price. It was not long before their frustrations turned into direct attacks towards me. One night, while I was having dinner alone, my mother burst into the kitchen with tears in her eyes and a fury that I had never seen before. "You are an ungrateful child," she shouted. "Everything we did was for the good of this family. And this is how you repay us, speaking badly about us with your grandparents and stealing our inheritance." I stared at her, taking a sip from my glass of water before calmly responding, "It was not about protecting the family. You sabotaged my future because you could not deal with the reality that your daughter is lazy and not up to par." My response ignited an argument that lasted almost an hour. My mother accused me of being selfish, of not understanding the pressure they felt as parents, and of not caring about my sister's feelings. My father finally intervened, but instead of trying to mediate, he simply duplicated my mother's narrative, saying that I was too ambitious and that I should have learned to sacrifice myself for the common good. It was at that moment when I understood something. They were not angry because they had lost the inheritance. They were angry because I had taken control of a situation that they thought they could manage, and the worst thing for them was knowing that there was no going back. While my parents continued blaming me for everything that was happening to them, the rest of the family began to distance themselves from them. My grandparents, of course, were the center of the decision to disinherit them, but other aunts and cousins also began to see it as an opportunity to remove my parents from their lives. The perfect facade that they had maintained for years was rapidly crumbling. Some relatives even stopped inviting them to events and meetings. My favorite aunt, who had always had problems with my parents' attitude, was one of the first to openly take sides. During a family meal to which my parents were not invited, she approached me and said, "I always knew that your parents did not value you enough. You did well in defending yourself." I am not going to lie. It was incredibly satisfying to hear that. For years, I had felt that I did not have a voice in my own family, but now the narrative was changing. They were the villains, not me. A few days later, while I was leaving for a meeting with some friends, I saw my parents in the living room arguing heatedly. My father was holding the phone and was raising his voice, which was not common in him. Although I did not want to get involved, I could not avoid listening when he mentioned my grandparents. "You cannot do this, Dad. This is not fair," he exclaimed. "We have dedicated our lives to this family, and now you are completely stripping us of it." For a moment, I thought that maybe my grandfather was giving in, but then my father slammed his fist on the table, something completely out of his character. "This is not over," he shouted before hanging up the phone forcefully. When he saw me standing in the entrance, his face went from fury to contempt. "I hope you are happy with yourself," he said. "You are destroying this family." I did not answer him, not because I did not have words, but because he did not deserve my energy. I simply took my things and left the house, letting them drown in their own frustration. What my parents did not know was that my grandparents had not finished yet. Although they had already disinherited them, they were also taking legal measures to ensure that they could not try to claim anything in the future. When I met with them a few days later, my grandfather explained that they had hired a lawyer to draft a document that not only excluded them from their will, but also prevented any legal disputes on their part. "We want to make sure that they can never use your achievements or ours for their benefit," my grandfather said firmly. "There are no more second chances." My grandparents also assured me that they were making plans to help me with anything I needed. They offered to pay not only my university tuition, but also my living expenses so that I would not have to worry about working while studying. It was an incredible gesture, one that filled me with gratitude, but I also knew that my parents could never overcome the fact that I was now the center of attention of the family. The final collapse of my parents came one afternoon when they tried to confront my grandparents directly. They arrived unannounced at their house demanding to talk about what was happening. My grandfather, who had no patience for their dramas, simply made them wait at the door while he called the police. When the officers arrived, my parents tried to explain that they only wanted to resolve a misunderstanding, but my grandfather did not give in. He told them clearly that if they tried to enter his house again, he would file a restraining order. When they returned home, they were more furious than ever. They accused me of having manipulated my grandparents and swore that they would eventually fix everything. But by that time, I had already won. After weeks of confrontations, drama, and a growing isolation from the family, my parents began to realize that they were losing more than they had anticipated. Not only had they been disinherited, but they were now the topic of conversation of all the relatives, and not in a good way. Their reputation, which they valued so much, was completely destroyed, and while they fell, I was preparing for the next chapter of my life, thanks to the unwavering support of my grandparents. Not long after the police kicked them out of my grandparents' house, my parents tried their last desperate move. They showed up in my room one night while I was reviewing documents for my new university. My mother, who had been crying all day, according to what I heard, tried to adopt a more conciliatory tone. "We can fix this," she said, sitting on the edge of my bed. "This whole misunderstanding does not have to define our family. We are your parents, and even if we have made mistakes, we have always wanted the best for you." My father, standing by the door with his arms crossed, nodded slowly. "We know that what we did was wrong," he admitted, "but in the end, it was because we love your sister as much as we love you. We only wanted the family to be in balance." I wanted to laugh at the irony. Balance, since one is sabotaging your son's future looking for balance, but I contained myself, knowing that it was better to let them finish before responding. When I finished listening to their speech, I decided that it was time to tell them what I thought. "You did not do this out of love," I said, staring at them. "You did it because you cannot accept that I want something more for my life. You want us all to remain an extension of your own egos, and when we do not fit into your narrative, you sabotage us." My mother began to cry, but my father remained firm. "Do you really think all this is worth it? You are dividing the family over something that already happened." "You divided this family," I replied, my voice calm but full of determination. "I am only protecting myself from the damage that you have caused me." Without saying another word, I got up and left the room, leaving them sitting there defeated. The following weeks marked the beginning of a complete separation between us. My parents tried to save what was left of their family relationships, but it was already too late. My grandparents had not only disinherited my parents, but they had also made sure to inform the rest of the family about what had happened. Most of the relatives were on my grandparents' side. Some even sent me messages of support, saying that they understood why I had made the decisions I made. But what really sealed my parents' fate was an unexpected call from my aunt, my father's sister. My aunt, who had never had a great relationship with my parents, decided to get involved in the situation. She called me one afternoon while I was packing to move to university. "You know," she said with a slightly amused tone, "your parents have always thought they were better than everyone. But what they did to you, that is something that not even I can forgive." At first, I thought it was just a casual comment. But then she continued, "Your grandparents not only disinherited them, they are also transferring the family home to your name. They do not want your parents to have anything to do with it now or in the future." I remained silent, trying to process what I had just heard. The house, which was the greatest symbol of my parents' status and stability, would now be mine. I knew how much that house meant to them, and this move was the final blow. "Your grandparents asked me to tell you because they want you to be prepared. They also said that if you do not want to live there, you can sell it. The decision is completely yours." When the news finally reached my parents, it was as if all the fury contained for weeks exploded at once. They screamed, they cried, and they even tried to confront my grandparents again, but this time my grandparents did not even bother to listen to them. My grandfather made it clear that any attempt to get involved with the house would result in immediate legal action. That night, my parents tried to confront me one last time, but this time I had nothing more to say to them. I looked at them with a mixture of pity and resolution. "You owe me nothing, and I owe you nothing," I said. "This is the end." I left the house that same night. My grandparents had already prepared everything for my move to university, and I knew that it was time to leave that chapter of my life behind. Now I am at university. It is not the university of my dreams, but I am in a solid program, and I am surrounded by people who support me. My grandparents continue to be my greatest support, and the relationship with them has only strengthened since all this began. I decided to sell the house, not because I needed the money, but because I did not want that place to continue being a connection with my past. I used part of the profits to make sure that my grandparents lived comfortably as a thank you for everything they did for me. My parents, well, I barely have contact with them now. They have tried to call me a couple of times, but after weeks of blaming me and avoiding any sincere apology, I finally blocked them. The last thing I heard is that they are facing financial problems because without the inheritance, they now have to adjust their lifestyle. The irony is not lost on me. They did all this to protect my sister, but they ended up destroying everything they valued. And although some might say that I went too far, I do not regret anything. My brother tried to turn my engagement party into a family reunion to announce his promotion, so let's make sure. For years, I silently accepted that my achievements were overshadowed by his exploits. My parents said he was a natural leader, but to me, he was simply an egomaniac expert at manipulating situations to revolve around him. When Nathan got a promotion at his company at 29, my parents threw a big party to celebrate. I remember sitting in a corner during that dinner. While everyone applauded his success, a part of me thought that perhaps after all that, Nathan would have exhausted his desire for attention, but I was wrong. The day Lucas, my boyfriend, proposed to me, it was the happiest day of my life. We were on vacation in the Rocky Mountains with a spectacular sunset view. Lucas had planned everything perfectly, even hiring a photographer to capture the exact moment. It was intimate, romantic, and exactly as I had dreamed. But, as always, the news reached my family, and with it, the problems. My mother was the first to congratulate me. "How wonderful, Juliet, but have you told Nathan yet?" she asked. I felt a knot in my stomach. Why did it have to be a priority to tell my brother about my engagement? However, I decided and called him that night. Nathan sounded strangely indifferent. "Ah, congratulations. When is the engagement party?" he asked casually, as if he were talking about the weather. "We are thinking of having it next month in Denver." "Lucas has already booked a room for the 14th inch, I replied excitedly. "The 14th? Huh, well, I guess I can try to be free," he said in a tone that did not promise anything. Although his lack of enthusiasm bothered me, I decided not to give it importance. For once, I wanted to believe that everything would be all right. When the day of the engagement party arrived, Lucas and I were excited. The place, a beautiful restaurant overlooking downtown Denver, was decorated with warm lights and seasonal flowers. We had invited about 50 people, including close friends and family, including Nathan. My mother had insisted that it would be a special meeting because the whole family would be together. A part of me felt uncomfortable hearing that, but I decided to focus on enjoying the moment. Everything started wonderfully. The guests arrived punctually, the champagne flowed, and Lucas and I received congratulations for our engagement. Even my parents seemed relaxed and happy for once. But then, like a harbinger, Nathan arrived late and was not alone. He entered the room with his wife, Camille, who wore a nervous but neutral expression. However, the star of his entrance was Nathan himself, who was carrying a laptop and a projector. Lucas gave me a confused look, and I replied with a gesture of "let it go." Nathan, as always, was a spectacle. Dressed in a suit that was too formal for the occasion, he looked like a CEO about to give an important speech. He greeted everyone as if he were the host, and quickly caught the attention of my parents. I tried to ignore him and enjoy the moment with Lucas. But then I heard my mother say something that chilled my blood. "Nathan wants to show you something after dinner. It is a special surprise for the family," she announced with a proud smile. "A surprise after dinner? No, no, no." I felt my stomach churning. I knew exactly where this was going. Dinner went on normally, although I could feel the tension building up every time someone tried to toast Lucas and me. Nathan would intervene with some irrelevant story or a comment about his career. I bit my tongue to say nothing. "Do not ruin your night," I repeated mentally. But, as expected, Nathan was not going to settle for small interruptions. When the waiters began to serve dessert, Nathan rose from his seat, grabbed the microphone that the DJ had been using for background music, and, with a bright smile, said, "Attention everyone, before the night ends, I want to share something very exciting with you." The room went silent. Lucas took my hand and gave me a reassuring squeeze, but I was trembling with rage. Nathan connected his laptop to the projector and began to talk about an important milestone in his career. He projected images of sales charts, company awards, and, finally, a slide that said, in huge letters, "Regional Director Nathan Collins." While the room erupted in applause, I was in shock. This could not be happening. Nathan had just turned our engagement party into his personal celebration. I felt my blood boil, but he was not done yet. The moment I saw those words projected on the screen, Regional Director Nathan Collins. My mind went blank. The whole room, including my parents, applauded and celebrated as if they were at a corporate event. Meanwhile, Lucas squeezed my hand trying to calm me down, but the rage began to bubble inside me. This could not be happening, not at my engagement party. Nathan, with his usual charisma and overflowing confidence, began to give a speech about how he had worked hard to get to that position. He even thanked Camille for being his unconditional support throughout the process. Really, at my party, all eyes were on him, and my stomach churned with every word. My parents, of course, were euphoric. My mother leaned towards the guests, murmuring things like, "We knew he would make it. We have always been so proud of him." Meanwhile, my father nodded in approval, as if he were watching his son receive a Nobel Prize. I tried to restrain myself. God knows I tried, but when Nathan finished his speech and my mother suggested we toast him, I could not contain myself. Nathan looked at me at first bewildered, but then with a smug smile. "What is wrong? Juliet, are you not happy for me?" Lucas stood up next to me, clearly worried about my reaction. "Happy for you, Nathan. This is my engagement party, remember? The day when it was supposed to celebrate with Lucas, not your career," I said, trying to maintain composure, although I felt my voice tremble. Nathan shrugged as if he did not understand the problem. "Juliet, I did not do it to steal your spotlight. I thought it would be nice to share this news with the family. After all, when else are we all going to be together?" His tone was so condescending that I felt a knot in my chest. "Exactly," I said, raising my voice a little. "Don't you realize how selfish this is? You could have made your big announcement at any other time, but you decided to do it on my day because, of course, Nathan always has to be the center of attention." My father intervened with his usual authoritarian tone. "Juliet, do not be silly. Nathan is only sharing something important with us. We are all here as a family." "Family?" I let out a bitter laugh. "Is this what family means to you? That every time I have something special, Nathan turns it into a show about himself? Why do you always have to minimize what I do?" My mother sighed, clearly uncomfortable with the confrontation. "Juliet, honey, do not make a big scene. We are all here to celebrate." "Exactly, we are here to celebrate Lucas and me," I replied, feeling my control crumble. But as always, Nathan had to ruin it. Nathan finally lost patience and replied in a cold tone. "Look, if it really bothers you so much, then I am sorry. Okay, but I am not going to apologize for my success. Maybe you should learn to share the spotlight." The room went silent, and I could feel the uncomfortable looks of the other guests. Lucas squeezed my hand and whispered to me, "Juliet, let's go. It is not worth it." I wanted to listen to Lucas, but something inside me could not let this pass without consequence. Nathan needed to learn that he could not keep doing this. I looked at Lucas and nodded, but in my mind I was already planning something else. This was not going to stay like this. That same night, after most of the guests had left, my Aunt Sophie approached me. She had always been one of the few people in my family who really understood my frustration with Nathan. She gave me a hug and said in a low voice, "I know how difficult it was for you tonight, but keep in mind that everyone saw what happened. You are not alone in this." That gave me some comfort, but still I could not get out of my head how humiliating the night had been. Lucas tried to cheer me up when we got home, but I was too emotionally exhausted to respond. Instead, I stayed up late thinking about how I could get back at Nathan. It was then that I had an idea. I knew that Nathan was planning a big gala dinner in 2 weeks to officially celebrate his promotion with his colleagues and work friends. Of course, my family was also invited, and my parents kept talking about how exciting it would be. What they did not know was that I also had an ace up my sleeve. When I found out that Nathan was organizing an extravagant dinner to celebrate his promotion, I knew it was my perfect opportunity. I am not a vindictive person by nature, but after years of putting up with his slights, I felt that this time I needed to take the reins and put a stop to it. Lucas was not entirely convinced when I told him my idea, but eventually he agreed to help me, arguing that Nathan really needed to learn that the world did not revolve around him. Nathan had booked one of the most exclusive restaurants in Denver for his dinner. My mother kept praising how incredible it would be: a personalized menu, a live violinist, even gifts for the attendees. It was, as always, a disproportionate spectacle that screamed, "Look how successful I am." However, my plan was not based on ruining his night completely, but on using his own ego against him. The key was in Camille, his wife. Although she had always been neutral in our confrontations, I had noticed that she was also fed up with Nathan's attitudes. At the engagement party, Camille spent more time looking at her wine glass than enjoying the celebration, clearly uncomfortable with the whole affair. I decided that she would be the key piece in my strategy. The week before the dinner, I called Camille under the pretext of thanking her for attending the party, although I knew she had no choice being married to Nathan. After a few minutes of cordial conversation, I launched the bait. Camille, I hope I do not sound intrusive, but I wanted to know how you feel about all this dinner. You seem exhausted. She sighed, clearly grateful that someone asked her. To be honest, Juliet, I am tired of all these celebrations. Nathan insists that this is necessary to consolidate his image at work, but I think it has gotten out of control. I am not a fan of all this pomp. That was my moment. Camille, I do not want this to sound bad, but I think it would be interesting for Nathan to understand how it feels when someone else steals the spotlight. What do you think if we give a little twist to his event? Camille was clearly intrigued. After explaining my plan, I was surprised that she not only agreed, but also offered to help me execute it. If this makes Nathan come down a little from his cloud, count on me, she said with a smile. The restaurant was immaculate, decorated in the ostentatious style that Nathan adored. The tables were adorned with elaborate centerpieces, and the violinist played a soft melody as the guests arrived. I attended with Lucas, keeping us discreet and away from the attention. Meanwhile, Nathan was in his element, greeting everyone as if he were a movie star. When it was time for the speech, Nathan went up to the small, improvised stage and began his typical harangue about hard work, success, and his vision for the future. Everything was going as he wanted, until Camille took the next step of the plan. She rose from her seat, interrupting Nathan with a sweet but firm smile. Nathan, honey, before you continue, I would like to take a moment to share something special with everyone here. I think it is a good time to do it, considering that we have family and friends gathered. The surprise on Nathan's face was evident. As something special, he stammered, clearly dislodged. Camilla nodded enthusiastically. Yes, something we have been keeping secret for a while. I did not want to steal your attention, but I think this is the perfect time. She took an envelope out of her purse and held it up. I am pregnant. The room exploded in applause and shouts of congratulations. Nathan, however, seemed paralyzed, as if his brain could not process what had just happened. Camille, for her part, played her role to perfection, smiling shyly and accepting hugs and congratulations from the guests. The irony of the situation did not go unnoticed by the guests, many of whom had been at my engagement party and witnessed how Nathan had ruined the night. While everyone congratulated Camille, the looks were directed towards Nathan, who was clearly struggling to maintain his composure. Finally, after what seemed like hours, Nathan took the microphone again, trying to regain control of the situation. This is incredible, Camille. Of course, we are excited about the baby, but let's get back to the topic of the night, my promotion. But no one was interested in talking about his promotion. Every time he tried to redirect the conversation towards himself, someone mentioned Camille or asked questions about the pregnancy. Even his colleagues seemed more interested in the baby news than in the sales charts that Nathan had prepared. It was, in essence, a repetition of what he had done to me. Only now he was on the wrong side of the equation. As Nathan struggled to maintain a facade of enthusiasm, Camille approached me and whispered, I think he is learning his lesson. Thank you, Juliet. When the night ended, Nathan looked defeated. He said goodbye to the guests with a tense smile, and, for the first time in years, I felt that I had managed to make him understand that not everything revolved around him. The dinner ended, but the effects of what happened resonated long after the last guests left. Nathan had been defeated in his own game, and, although he tried to act as if everything was all right, we all knew that he had been humiliated. For the first time, the tables had turned, and my brother was experiencing what it meant to be overshadowed. The next morning, I received an unexpected message from Camille. Nathan is furious, it said. He does not stop talking about how I ruined his big night, but honestly, I do not care. I think he needed this. Thank you for supporting me. That confirmation left me with a bittersweet feeling. Although I knew that what we had done was a kind of poetic justice, I was also worried about the impact on their marriage. My suspicions were confirmed later that week when my mother called me. What did you do, Juliet? She asked me in an accusatory tone. Me, what are you talking about? I replied, trying to sound innocent. Nathan told me that Camille announced her pregnancy during his dinner. He said that you had something to do with that you convinced her to sabotage him. Is it true? I took a moment to choose my words. Mom, Camille made her own decision. If she decided to share her news, that is her business. And honestly, did you really expect anyone to say nothing after how Nathan ruined my engagement party? Maybe now he understands how it feels. My mother was silent for a moment, then said, Nathan did not do it on purpose, Juliet. He has always been like that. Why cannot you accept it? That phrase hit me like a stone. Why could not I accept it? Because it was not fair, because it was not right that my brother could continue doing whatever he wanted without consequences while I had to be the submissive and tolerant sister. For the first time, I refused to back down. Well, Mom, maybe it is time for Nathan to learn that the world does not revolve around him, I said, cutting off the call before she could respond. A few days passed before Nathan finally contacted me directly. He called me and, without mincing words, began to berate me. What the hell is wrong with you? Juliet, what did you gain by manipulating Camille to ruin my dinner? It was my moment to shine, and you made it all about you again. The irony of his words made me laugh, but I quickly composed myself. Your moment to shine, Nathan? Do you hear what you are saying? You ruined my engagement party, but when someone does something similar to you, suddenly you are the victim. It was not the same, he shouted. Your engagement party was not a big event. It was just a family gathering. My dinner was professional, important for my career, and that makes it more valuable than my engagement. I replied, my tone rising a little. Nathan, all my life you have overshadowed me, my graduation, my birthdays, anything that was meaningful to me. You always had to be the center of attention. And you know what? For the first time, I felt that it was fair that you experienced how that feels. It was cruel, he spat. I never thought you would do something so petty. Petty as you have been all our lives? I said, my voice now trembling with frustration. Nathan, this was a lesson, nothing more, and if you cannot see how your actions affect others, then you need to reflect more on your priorities. He hung up before I could say anything else. Days after the call, I heard through Camille that things between them were tense. Nathan had withdrawn emotionally, feeling betrayed by both her and me. However, Camille did not seem particularly worried. Juliet, she told me during a call, I think this was necessary for him and for me. I am tired of living in the shadow of his ego. Maybe it is time to rethink how our marriage works. Although I did not expect my plan to cause such deep problems between them, I was not surprised. Nathan was not the type to accept constructive criticism, especially when it came from someone close. He had always been surrounded by flatterers, and this was the first time someone had made him face reality. My parents, of course, were outraged. My mother tried to convene a family meeting to repair the damage, but both Camille and I refused. This is not something that can be solved with a dinner, Mom, I told her. Nathan needs to learn to manage his priorities, and, if he does not, then I do not want to be part of his life. Although the tension in my family was at its highest point, something strange began to happen. Some of my other relatives, who had witnessed the drama for years, began to approach me with messages of support. My cousin Sophie, for example, sent me a message saying, I have always admired your patience with Nathan. I am glad you finally stood up for yourself. Even my Aunt Gao, who rarely got involved in family conflicts, called me to say, Juliet, you did the right thing. Nathan needed a dose of reality. And Camille, well, maybe she will finally find her voice in all this. Although I did not plan all this as a crusade to change the family dynamic, I realized that my little act of revenge had had a more profound impact than I imagined. For the first time, I felt that I had allies within my family, and that gave me a feeling of strength that I had never experienced before. Weeks passed since Nathan's dinner, and, although the waters seemed to calm down, the impact of my decision continued to shake the foundations of my family. Nathan remained distant, both with me and with Camille, and, according to her, their discussions had reached a critical point. Camille, for her part, looked more determined than ever to stop tolerating his behavior. Meanwhile, my mother, still clinging to the idea that the family should be united, continued trying to mediate between all of us. She sent me a message one night. Juliet, do you really want to continue in war with Nathan? The family is more important than these insignificant problems. I replied with a firmness that I had rarely used with her. Mom, I am not at war with Nathan. I am simply choosing not to be trampled on anymore. If that seems like a problem to you, then maybe you should ask yourself why. I received no response, but I took it as a small triumph. For the first time, I had said what I really felt without filters or fear of her reactions. A month after the dinner, I received a call from Camille. She sounded calm, but there was an air of resolution in her voice. Juliet, I wanted to tell you that I have decided to separate from Nathan. I was silent for a moment, processing what I had just heard. Although I knew that their relationship was tense, I did not expect Camille to make such a drastic decision so soon. Are you sure? I asked her, worried about what that would mean for her, and especially for the baby. Yes, she replied. This is not just for what happened at the dinner. It has been something that I have been considering for some time. Nathan has never had space for anyone else in his life than himself, and now that I am bringing a baby into the world, I cannot allow that pattern to continue. We deserve something better. I felt a mixture of sadness and admiration for her. Camille was someone who had lived under Nathan's shadow as much as I had, maybe even more, and now she was taking a brave step to change her life. I offered her my unconditional support. If you need anything at all, count on me. What I did not expect was what came next. Camille told me that she had decided to move temporarily to her parents' house, but that before leaving, she wanted Nathan to understand the consequences of his actions. I want him to know exactly why I am doing this, and I need you to be there with me when I do it. The day of the confrontation arrived, and, although I did not know exactly what to expect, I felt ready. Camille had insisted that I be present as moral support, but also as a witness to everything she had to say. We met in the house that she and Nathan shared, a space that, according to Camille, had always reflected more his tastes than hers. Nathan greeted us with an expression of surprise mixed with discomfort. He did not seem to be prepared for what Camille had planned. She began calmly, but her tone was charged with determination. Nathan, I am here to tell you that I am leaving, she began. I am not doing it on impulse, and it is not a decision that I have taken lightly, but I am tired. I am tired of living in a world where there is only space for your needs, your achievements, and your ego. Nathan tried to interrupt, but Camille raised her hand, stopping him. No, now it is my turn to speak. All our relationship has revolved around you, and I have been an accomplice in allowing it, but that is over. I do not want to raise our child in an environment where he always has to fight for the attention and respect of his own father. Nathan was furious. This is for what happened at the dinner, for what Juliet told you. Now you are on her side too. Camille shook her head. This has nothing to do with Juliet and everything to do with you. Juliet simply helped me see something that I already knew, that I am not willing to continue being an extension of your ego, and if you cannot understand that, then you are even more lost than I thought. The pieces begin to fall. After Camille left, Nathan looked at me with contained fury. This is your fault, he spat. You have always been jealous. You have always tried to ruin me. Jealous of you? I replied calmly. Nathan, this is not about jealousy, it is about respect. Camille finally realized something that I understood years ago. There is no space in your life for anyone other than yourself, and until you change that, you will continue to lose the people who really care about you. I left him there alone with his thoughts. I do not know if my words affected him or not, but I did not care anymore. For the first time, I felt that I had closed an important chapter of my life. Camille and I stayed in touch. She began a new life away from Nathan, and, although she knew that the road would not be easy, she felt safer and happier than ever. For my part, I focused on my relationship with Lucas and on building a future that was not contaminated by the toxic dynamics of my family. Story 3. My husband and I paid for my nephew's college for years only for him to insult us, drag us into family drama, and end up in legal trouble. This is going to be long, but I need to vent because I cannot take it anymore. I have been turning this over in my mind for weeks and need outside perspectives. There is so much to untangle that I do not even know where to begin. I am a 39-year-old woman, married to my husband for over 16 years. Our relationship has been mostly stable and happy. We have supported each other to build a comfortable life, both with stable jobs, a nice house in the suburbs, and a close circle of friends. But as everything in life, nothing is perfect. The only really big obstacle that we have faced in our marriage was dealing with infertility. I do not want to go into medical details, but my reproductive system decided that it was simply not going to cooperate. It was devastating for both of us because we always dreamed of having children. We talked for hours about the names, how I would decorate the baby, and we imagined family vacations full of childish laughter. When we received the news that we could not conceive naturally, I felt as if the ground disappeared under my feet. We went through all the stages of grief: denial, anger, negotiation, depression, and finally acceptance. But that acceptance did not come easy. We tried everything. Fertility treatments that left me a hormonal mess. My husband deserves an award for putting up with me. Alternative therapies that involved everything from strange teas to ridiculous body positions. We even considered experimental procedures, but the risks were enormous and the possibilities minimal. After years of trying and spending thousands of dollars, we came to the conclusion that it was not going to happen. It was a hard blow, but we decided that if we could not be parents in the traditional sense, we could still do something meaningful with our lives. While we were navigating through this new reality, an opportunity appeared. My sister-in-law, my husband's younger sister, was going through a disastrous divorce. Her ex was the typical movie villain: irresponsible, unfaithful, and emotionally abusive. When they finally separated, my sister-in-law was left alone with 2 small children and a teenager. The money that she received for child support barely covered the basics, and despite working 2 jobs, she lived in a constant struggle. It was then when my husband and I decided to intervene. We did not have our own children, but we had resources and wanted to make a difference in their lives. We thought, if we can help them have a better future, it will be worth it. Thus began our adventure. When we started, the children were lovely. The oldest, who at that time was 16, was a studious boy with ambitions of being an engineer. The middle one of 12 was the artist of the group, always drawing or writing stories in his notebooks, and the youngest, with only 8 years old, was a whirlwind of energy, but with a smile that melted hearts. We thought that our donations for their education would be the perfect solution. We started paying for extracurricular activities, summer courses, and finally the university tuition of the oldest. It was a financial sacrifice, but it made us happy to know that we were doing something meaningful. However, as they say, no one can foresee the future, and what at the beginning seemed an altruistic work slowly transformed into a nightmare. It was a gradual process, but years later, here we are in the center of a whirlwind of family drama, insults, and legal decisions. The oldest was our first project. When he graduated from high school, he looked so promising. He had been an excellent student. He even won a partial scholarship, but when he arrived at university, everything changed. He began to show attitudes of total disinterest towards his studies. Every semester his grades dropped more, and despite our warnings, it seemed that he did not care at all. We tried to talk to him. My husband even traveled to his university to talk to his professors and seek guidance. But the boy always had an excuse ready. The professor does not understand me. The course is too difficult. I am dealing with a lot of stress. What did not baffle us was that at the same time, he seemed to have money to party every weekend according to what we saw on social media, but the worst was yet to come. Meanwhile, my sister-in-law did nothing but defend him. "It is just a stage. He will get serious," she said, while I swallowed the desire to answer her that the stage was costing us controllers. And for not understanding his process, my sister-in-law looked at us as if we had committed a crime, and my mother-in-law joined the chorus with phrases such as, "The family does not put conditions on the family." It was then that the seeds of resentment began to germinate. After our initial confrontation with my oldest nephew about his grades and our decision to demand of him a real academic commitment, things got tense inside the family. We thought that it would be a momentary bump, something that would eventually be solved with time and effort. Spoiler alert, it was not like that. In retrospect, it was the beginning of the end. Once we established the rule of maintaining a minimum GPA to continue with the financing, my nephew began to change towards us. He was no longer the friendly boy who used to thank every opportunity. Instead, a version of him that we had never seen emerged: dismissive, bad-tempered, and surprisingly aggressive. Everything that we did seemed to bother him. If we tried to talk about his progress, he would respond with monosyllables. If we asked about his grades, he said that we were invading his privacy, and if we reminded him that we were paying his tuition, he would always respond with something like, "It is my education, not yours." The tensions worsened when we discovered, thanks to an unexpected call from a friend close to the family, that my nephew had been missing classes regularly and spending much of our money on parties, alcohol, and unnecessary gadgets. When we confronted my sister-in-law, her response was a classic. "He is a boy. He is experimenting. Do not be so hard on him." Experimenting, of course, but apparently with our money. It was then when my husband and I began to wonder if we were really helping or simply financing a disaster. While we were dealing with the oldest, the middle nephew, who at that time was in high school, began to show concerning behaviors. This boy, who before was so creative and full of ideas, had developed an attitude almost traced from his older brother. He became apathetic with his studies, and what is worse, extremely rude. He began to question everything that we did for him, as if our help was an obligation and not a generous gesture. A scene in particular has remained etched in my memory. One day I took him to a store to buy him art materials for a school project. While he was checking the products, he made a sarcastic comment about how it was not enough what I was buying him. According to him, he deserved something of better quality because good projects need the correct tools. He said it so casually, as if it was normal to demand more from someone who was making a sacrifice to support. That was the first time that I really felt the contempt. When I told my sister-in-law what had happened, her response was even worse. "Do not take it personally. He is just being honest." Honesty or not. That was the moment when I felt that something was falling apart. If we thought that the problems with the two older ones were difficult, the youngest was ready to demonstrate that the title of worst behavior was still in play. This boy had an energy that at first was charming, but that with the years transformed into a brazen and rebellious attitude. When he turned 14, he was already causing problems at school, constant fights, unjustified absences, and a complete lack of respect towards the figures of authority. On one occasion, while we were taking him home after an extracurricular activity, he openly mocked my husband and me, saying something like, "It is funny how you work so hard to help others, but you do not have your own children. It is as if you were trying to buy a family." I remember feeling as if the air was freezing in the car. My husband, who has always been the most patient, simply limited himself to saying, "That is not something that you should say to someone who is helping you." But inside I know that he was just as hurt as I was. We did not give importance to that incident, thinking that it was just a sample of immaturity, but it was a harbinger of what was to come. The breaking point arrived during a family dinner at my mother-in-law's house. Everyone was there, including my nephews and my sister-in-law. It was one of those reunions that should be cheerful, but that already from the beginning had a strange atmosphere. Joel, the oldest, barely addressed us, while the one in the middle gave us disdainful looks, and the youngest, well, he seemed to be plotting something, because he did not stop laughing with a mocking tone. After dinner, while everyone chatted in the living room, Joel and his younger brother began to make sarcastic comments about my husband and about me. Things like, "It is strange how they always want to get involved in our lives, and why do not they buy a pet if they need something that makes them feel important?" The laughs between them were strong enough for the entire room to fall silent. But what really made me explode was when the youngest looked directly at me and said, "You should be grateful that at least we pretend that we care about what you do for us. After all, you need this more than we do." I felt as if I had been slapped in public. I looked at my sister-in-law, hoping that she would intervene, but she simply shrugged her shoulders and said, "They are teenagers. They do not know what they say." That night when we arrived home, my husband and I had a serious conversation. Both were exhausted not only by the financial effort, but by the emotional wear and tear that this was causing in our lives. We decided that something had to change. We had put too much energy and resources into helping this family, and the only thing that we received in return were insults and lack of respect. It was then when we made a decision that would change the course of everything. We would give them a final warning. If they did not show a real and tangible change in their behavior, we would cut off all financial support. No more university tuitions, no more art materials, no more anything. It was time to set limits. After years of tolerating insults, contempts, and attitudes that only reflected ingratitude, my husband and I had finally reached the limit. We knew that continuing financing the education and the expenses of my nephews under these conditions was not only a loss of resources, but also a detriment to our peace of mind. It was time to establish clear limits. We organized a meeting in our house with my sister-in-law, her 3 children, and my mother-in-law. It was uncomfortable from the beginning. Everyone arrived with long faces as if they already knew that we were not going to offer them good news, but we were determined to expose our position with calm and clarity. "We want you to understand something," began my husband with a serious tone. "Everything that we have done for you has been for love and with the intention of helping you have a better future, But in the last years, we have felt that that effort has not been valued, and what is worse, we have been treated with contempt. The boys did not say anything, but the expression of Joel, the oldest, said it all. He was crossed arms with a look of superiority that made my blood boil, as if he was thinking, "What are you going to do about it?" "From now on," continued my husband, "we are going to be clear. The financial support is conditioned to two things very simple. First, mutual respect. Second, that they demonstrate a real commitment with their studies and their future. This is not a negotiation." My sister-in-law, obviously uncomfortable, tried to intervene. "You are exaggerating. They are just boys. The family should support each other without putting so many conditions." "This is not a punishment," I responded firmly. "But if there is no respect, we cannot continue helping them. You have to demonstrate that you value what has been given to you." We finished the meeting without clear answers on the part of my nephews. Their faces were a map of frustration, anger, and resentment. My sister-in-law and my mother-in-law were upset, but they did not say much, probably because they knew that we were not going to yield this time. In the weeks that followed, there was an absolute silence on the part of my sister-in-law and the boys. No messages, no calls, nothing. My husband and I knew that this was their way of reacting to the ultimatum, ignoring us, probably hoping that we would return to look for them or that we would feel guilty, but we were not going to yield. A month later, the first message arrived, an email from Joel. Not a message of apology, not a sample of reflection, but a list of demands disguised as requirements. In the email, he detailed how much money he needed for his next semester, together with a suggestion that we also cover the rent of his apartment because, according to him, he needed a suitable space to study. My husband and I were incredulous. After everything that we had said, after everything that had happened, Joel not only did not show remorse, but he doubled his level of exigency. We ignored the email. If he thought that he could treat us as an ATM, he was very wrong. Then the calls began. My sister-in-law dialed us day and night with a mixture of pleas and reproaches. In a particularly tense call, she accused me directly of wanting to ruin the opportunities of her children. According to her, we were acting with malice because we did not have our own children and we wanted to control the lives of others. "That is not fair," I responded with a trembling voice, trying to maintain calm. "We only ask for respect. If you cannot demonstrate that, why should we continue helping them?" "Respect?" scoffed my sister-in-law. "Since when do the boys have to earn the support of the family? This is not a commercial transaction. The family is there to help, not to put conditions." My husband, who had been listening to the conversation, finally intervened. "The family is also there to teach values, and if you are not willing to demonstrate that you value our help, it does not make sense to continue with this." Shortly after, there was another family meeting, this time at my mother-in-law's house. We did not go with the intention of arguing, but from the moment we crossed the door, it was clear that we had been summoned to face a family tribunal. My mother-in-law, my sister-in-law, and several distant relatives were present. Joel and his younger brother were there with arrogant expressions, as if they knew that they had backing. "This has to stop," began my mother-in-law with her best maternal tone. "There have been many misunderstandings, but it is time to leave this behind. We are a family." "Leave it behind?" I asked, trying to maintain composure. "What do you mean? Because until now we have not received any apology or sample of respect on the part of the boys." "They are young," replied my mother-in-law. "They make mistakes, but we cannot ruin their future for insignificant things." "Insignificant?" My husband, always patient, raised his voice. "How to insult my wife in public, how to ignore our basic conditions to help them, how to treat our help as a right and not as a gift." The meeting became an explosion of shouts and recriminations. Joel, in a moment of fury, even accused us of having destroyed his life by not giving him money for what he wanted to do after high school. My mother-in-law, of course, backed him, arguing that young people need freedom to explore. It was at that moment that we made our final decision. "If they do not want to comply with our conditions," said my husband, "it is okay, but you will not receive a cent more from us, neither for the university nor for anything else." The reaction was immediate. My sister-in-law shouted that we were destroying her family. Joel left the room furious while the youngest gave us one last sarcastic comment. "We will see how you survive without us." I did not respond. It was no longer worth it. That night, my husband and I arrived home exhausted but determined. We had made a decision and we knew that it would be difficult, but we also knew that it was the right thing to do. We would no longer be used or manipulated. If the boys wanted to move forward, they would have to do it on their own. We knew that this was not the end of the drama, but at least we had recovered something that we had lost in the process: our dignity. When we officially cut off financial support for Joel and his brothers, we knew that there would be repercussions. What we did not expect was the magnitude of the drama that would unleash. What followed was a combination of recriminations, rumors, and surprisingly legal situations that we never imagined we would end up facing. Few days after our decision, my phone began to explode with text messages from distant relatives, some surprised and others outraged. Apparently, my sister-in-law had begun a smear campaign against us, painting us as the insensitive villains that had abandoned her family in their moment of need. There was no shortage of melodramatic phrases in their messages. They were about to build something big and you destroyed it, or how can you sleep knowing that you ruined the education of my children? My mother-in-law, faithful to her style, did not stay behind. She made personal calls to each member of the family, crying and asking for support. She said things like, "I cannot believe that my own son is giving his back to his sister and his nephews. It is heartless." The worst was when someone called us to say that my sister-in-law had even insinuated that we were jealous because we did not have our own children. It was a low blow. We knew that many people would not understand the truth because, as always, the narrative of the victim is easier to believe, but we decided to stand firm. We were not going to respond to the gossip. We were not going to defend ourselves. We had made our decision, and there was no turning back. Approximately a month later, things escalated to a level that we never would have imagined. One afternoon, while I was at home working, my husband received a call from an unknown number. It was the police. Joel had been arrested. At first, I thought that it was a mistake, a misunderstanding, but as my husband listened to the officer on the phone, his expression hardened. When he hung up, he looked at me with incredulity and a touch of sadness. "Joel has been selling drugs," he said simply. My brain took a moment to process what I had just heard. Joel? The same Joel that used to sit at our table and talk to us about his big dreams, the boy that we had supported with every cent available, selling drugs. Apparently, Joel had been involved in this since shortly after he was selling illegal substances to other students. What got him in trouble was that one of his clients, an underage, was discovered and ended up denouncing him to reduce his own sentence. The story did not end there. It turns out that Justin, the younger brother, was also involved. Although he had not actively participated in the sale, he was aware of Joel's activities and had agreed to be his messenger on several occasions. The fact that he was still underage allowed him to avoid major charges, but he was registered in the system as a dice. When my sister-in-law called us, she was completely out of it. She screamed, cried, and of course, blamed us. "This is your fault," she yelled through the phone. "If you had not abandoned them, Joel would not have had to resort to this." I had to restrain myself so as not to lose my temper. My husband, more calm, responded coldly, "No, Fiona, this is Joel's fault. We did everything possible to support him. He made this decision, not us." As was to be expected, my sister-in-law and my mother-in-law asked us to help. They wanted us to hiring. Tears and an amount of passive-aggressive messages on social media that I had never seen in my life. My mother-in-law even went to the extreme of saying, "If he ends up in jail, it will be your fault. You could save him, and you have chosen not to do it. I will never forget it." Meanwhile, Monica, the oldest daughter, remained on the sidelines of all this disaster from the beginning. She made it clear that she was not going to support the decisions of her brothers, nor to get involved in the legal problems. They chose that path, she told me one night on the phone, and honestly, Mom always protected them too much. This was inevitable. When Fiona realized that Monica was not going to finance lawyers nor justify the behavior of her brothers, she attacked her with the same fury that she had directed towards us. She accused her of being disloyal, of having abandoned her family for her perfect life in Europe, and finally, she told her something that froze me. "If you do not help your brothers, I do not want to see you ever again." That night, Monica arrived at our house with her suitcase. Her mother had kicked her out of the house for refusing to finance Joel's defense. It was as if Fiona was burning every bridge possible, alienating the only people who had really tried to help her. Of course, the extended family had opinions about everything that was happening. Some sided with us, understanding that we had already done more than we could. Others, as was to be expected, blamed us. "You should help regardless of what the boys have done. It is what the family does," was one of the most repeated phrases, but the most common was, "How can you give your back to your own nephews?" The truth is that we did not give them their backs. They pushed us to this point. After weeks of discussions, guilt, and family dramas, the Real consequences of our decisions began to be felt. What before seemed a whirlwind of insults and emotional manipulation was transformed into a silent battle. My husband and I were constantly defending our actions not only before the family, but also before ourselves. Had we done the right thing? Had we been too hard? Joel's case advanced faster than we expected. The evidence against him was overwhelming, and although his public defender did everything possible to minimize the sentence, there was not much to do. Joel was sentenced to several years in prison for possession and distribution of controlled substances. The sentence included the possibility of parole, but he would have to demonstrate good behavior to be eligible for it. When the family received the news, it was as if a bomb had fallen. My sister-in-law was inconsolable. My mother-in-law blamed everyone but Joel, and the tensions in the family reached a critical point. They accused us of not having done enough to save him and of having abandoned him in his darkest hour. Even after everything that Joel had done, they continued seeing him as a victim. My husband and I remained firm. We had done everything that was in our hands to support him in the past, but Joel had made conscious decisions that led him to that point. We could not carry the guilt of his actions. While Joel was facing the consequences of his decisions, Justin seemed to be taking a similar path, but with more subtlety. Although he was treated as a minor influenced by his older brother, the mandatory therapy sessions did not seem to be having an effect. We heard from other relatives that Justin had become a problematic presence at home. He missed school, disobeyed his mother constantly, and continued having an attitude of complete indifference towards any authority. One day Fiona called us desperate, asking for help. According to her, Justin was out of control and needed discipline. My husband reminded her with calm but firmness that this was a situation that she had allowed. We gave you tools, resources, and support for years. What do you expect us to do now if you did not listen before? Her response was as predictable as frustrating. You could help if you wanted, you simply choose not to do it. That was the last time my husband spoke with Fiona. We decided to cut off contact completely with her and with Justin. It was clear that as long as he maintained that attitude, there was no way for the situation to improve. Meanwhile, my mother-in-law intensified her campaign of smear against us. Apparently unable to accept that we were not going to get involved anymore, she began to spread even more malicious rumors among the family. She accused us of being selfish, of using our previous help as a way to control Fiona and her children, and she even got to insinuate that our real objective had been to humiliate the family from the beginning. The most painful thing was when we heard that she had sold several objects of family value, including antique jewelry and inherited furniture, to cover part of the legal costs of Joel and other expenses of Fiona. When a cousin mentioned it to us during a meeting, we simply nodded. It was not worth it to argue with someone who had decided to ignore the facts. In the midst of all this chaos, Monica continued being a source of comfort and support for us. After having been kicked out of her house by her mother, she stayed with us for several weeks before returning to her job in Europe. During that time, we had long conversations about what had happened with her family. I always knew that Mom had favoritisms, but I never thought that she would get so far. She confessed to us one night. It is as if she was blind to everything that my brothers do, and she always finds a way to justify it. We tried to comfort her, assuring her that it was not her responsibility to fix the mistakes of her mother or her brothers. Monica said goodbye with tears in her eyes, but also with a determination that made me feel proud. No matter what they say, she said before leaving, I will always be grateful for everything that you did for me. I would not have gotten to where I am without you. The next event that marked an important turn was a meeting that took place a few months after Joel's sentence. It was a special occasion, the 80th birthday of a dear uncle. My husband and I decided to attend more than anything for respect to the uncle, although we knew that it would probably be an emotional minefield. From the moment we arrived, we could feel the looks. My mother-in-law and Fiona were there together with Justin. The tension was palpable. Joel obviously was not present. We tried to stay away, but it did not take long for the drama to begin. During dinner, Justin made a sarcastic comment out loud. How good that you came. Surely you are here to judge us as always. Some people laughed uncomfortably, but my husband and I ignored him. Then when I got up to give a toast in honor of the uncle, I heard Justin murmur something to Fiona. I could not understand completely what he said, but the tone and the giggles that followed were enough to enrage. For the first time in a long time, I lost patience. If you have something to say it out loud, I told him calmly. The room went silent. Justin Visibly surprised, tried to joke it was a joke. Aunt, relax. There is nothing funny in disrespecting, I responded, especially to people who have done more for you than you will ever understand. That night, my husband and I agreed that it was not worth it to continue trying. We were exhausted emotionally, and we knew that no more effort would change the dynamics with Fiona and Justin or the rest of the family that supported them unconditionally. We decided to cut off contact with everyone except with Monica. There would be calls, and we would definitely not participate in more dramas. It was time to prioritize our peace and let them face the consequences of their own actions. After deciding to cut ties with Fiona, Justin, and the rest of the family that insisted on their toxic narrative, my husband and I felt a mixture of relief and sadness. Relief because we were finally recovering control over our life and emotions. Sadness because despite everything, there had been years of sacrifices, affection, and effort that ended in this dead end. The reaction of the family was predictable. My mother-in-law, faithful to her style, made sure that everyone knew that we were the bad guys of the movie. According to the rumors, we were selfish, cold, and we did not understand what family meant. Fiona, for her part, did not miss an opportunity to paint Joel and Justin as victims of our cruelty. A cousin sent us a message that summarized perfectly the dynamics. Everyone is talking about you as if you were monsters, but the truth, you did more for them than anyone else, and they ruined it. That message, although brief, was like a bomb. It reminded us that we were not crazy for having set a limit. There were people that understood our position, although they were few. Shortly after cutting off contact, rumors began to arrive about Fiona's condition. Apparently, she was on the verge of a collapse. With Joel in prison and Justin out of control, she could not handle the pressure. She tried to convince Monica to return and help with the family, but Monica, firm in her position, refused. Monica called us after one of these discussions and told us what had happened. She told me that I am selfish, that I am letting the family die. She told us with a tone of incredulity, but I cannot continue allowing her to manipulate me. We assured her that she was doing the right thing. Fiona had built her life based on excuses and manipulation, and now she was facing the consequences of her decisions. One day, months after we cut off contact, Justin appeared unexpectedly at our door. We had not have seen him since the family meeting where his attitude was the final trigger. He was different, thinner, and with an expression that seemed a mixture of nervousness and repentance. "Can I talk to you?" he said, looking at the floor. My husband and I exchanged looks. On one hand, we wanted to close the door and remain firm in our decision of not getting involved anymore. On the other, something in his tone made us think that maybe, just maybe, he had learned something. We invited him to enter, and while he sat on our sofa, he began to talk. He told us that he had left school, that Fiona could no longer handle him at home, and that he felt that he had ruined everything. "I know that I have been an idiot," he said with tears in his eyes, "and I know that you have no reasons to help me, but I do not know where else to go." It was a difficult moment. My husband and I had mixed feelings. On one hand, we wanted to help him, but on the other, we knew that we could not repeat the same mistakes. "Justin," said my husband with calm, "we cannot fix your life for you. We already tried to help you in the past, but you did not value it. If you really want to change, you are going to have to demonstrate it." We gave him information about youth employment programs and community resources, but we made it clear that we could not get involved directly again. Justin left grateful, but we knew that there was still a long way to go for him. Meanwhile, my mother-in-law, who had been one of the most critical voices towards us, began to face the consequences of her own decisions. She had sold so many valuable things to finance the legal problems of Joel and keep Fiona afloat that she had practically emptied her personal patrimony. We heard through other relatives that she was now seeking financial support from the same relatives that she had manipulated to hate us. Nobody seemed willing to help her. Her smear campaign against us had alienated even some of the closest members of the family. It was an ironic and sad turn, but we did not feel satisfaction for it. Rather, it was a lesson of what happens when one lives without assuming responsibilities. Monica continued being the only member of the family with whom we maintained contact. With time, our relationship with her strengthened even more. She visited us whenever she could, and every conversation with her was a reminder that our effort had not been in vain. One night, while we were having dinner, Monica told us something that moved me deeply. "You saved me. If it had not been for your support, I would probably be trapped in the same cycle as my brothers. I will always be grateful for what you did." It was at that moment that I realized that although everything had ended in chaos, our effort had not been in vain. we helped someone who really valued it, and that now was thriving thanks to it. Story 4. My sister-in-law forbade me from going to her wedding because I was too popular with the family. He found out, broke up with her, and now my whole family wants me to apologize. I am a 25-year-old woman and I need to vent because my life has turned into a reality show-worthy drama in recent weeks. To put you in context, my older brother, who is 30 years old, was about to marry his fiancée after being together for almost 5 years. We all thought they were a solid couple. But, oh surprise, things took an unexpected turn and his wedding is now completely canceled. The reason all this chaos apparently revolves around me, or that is what they want me to believe. Let's see. First, let me explain how my relationship with my family is. It is not that it is bad, but we are not the type of family that gets together every Sunday to eat roast and share anecdotes of the week either. Since I went to study at the university in another state, our relationship has been distant, and I do not mean only physically. I feel that I have never been entirely welcome in the family dynamics. My mom and my brother have a very close, almost symbiotic relationship, and my dad simply follows the rhythm of what my mom says. I, on the other hand, have always been the independent one, which is a polite way of saying the one who does not fit in. The truth is that although I am not the favorite, I do not usually get involved in family dramas. I go to important meetings such as birthdays and Christmas. I smile, I do what they ask me, and I withdraw without making waves. But this matter with the wedding has changed everything. Everything began a few months ago during my brother's engagement dinner. It was a formal evening organized by my mom with dozens of family and friends of the couple. I was there as always, making an appearance, greeting everyone with kindness and trying to go unnoticed, but apparently that was not enough for my brother's fiancée. That night she began to give me strange looks every time I spoke with my brother or with any other member of my family. I realized that every time someone mentioned something positive about me, she would frown or remain silent with an expression that I could not decipher. I did not give it much importance at that moment. I thought that maybe she was nervous about the dinner or something like that. But at the end of the night, when we were all saying goodbye, she approached me and said something that froze me. You know, you do not have to try to be the protagonist here. This wedding is not about you. I was left speechless. I did not know whether to laugh or get angry. I had barely spoken that night, and what little I had said was about my work or some anecdote of my travels. I replied with a simple, "I do not understand what you mean," and I walked away thinking that she was being irrational. But, oh, if I had known that this was only the beginning. After that night, I noticed that things began to get tense between my brother and his fiancée. It was not something evident, but small comments here and there made me suspect that something was wrong. Then a few weeks ago, I received a call from my mom saying that I was not invited to the wedding. Yes, just as you read it, they excluded me from my own brother's wedding. I asked her why, and her answer was, "Well, it is what his fiancée wants, and we do not want to cause her unnecessary stress. You understand, right?" Of course I did not understand. How was I going to understand that they excluded me from such an important event in my family without a valid reason? After hanging up the phone, I tried to talk directly with my brother, but he avoided my calls for several days. When I finally managed to contact him, his response was evasive and left me more confused. It is complicated, but I think it is best for everyone. I hope you understand. At that moment, I began to feel that there was something bigger behind all this. The situation became even more surreal when a few days later I found out, thanks to a gossipy aunt, that the reason why they did not want me at the wedding was because my brother's fiancée saw me as a threat. According to her, I monopolized all the attention and my presence made her feel displaced. Seriously, all this because I am too nice to my own family. I do not even know how to respond to something so absurd. The news that my brother's fiancée saw me as a threat left me completely bewildered. To be honest, I am not even close to someone who seeks the center of attention. I am a quiet person, I do my thing, and as I said before, I try to keep a low profile in family gatherings. But apparently that was not enough to prevent this woman from deciding that I was a kind of villain in her mental soap opera. After finding out about the real reason why they had excluded me from the wedding, I decided that it was time to talk directly with my brother. I could not let this stay like this, especially because never in my life had I done anything to deserve such level of contempt. So with some nervousness, I went to his apartment without warning because clearly he was not going to answer my calls. When he opened the door, his face of surprise said it all. It was evident that he did not expect to see me. I told him that we needed to talk, and to my surprise, he did not oppose. He invited me in and offered me a coffee, but but I went straight to the point. "Why are you excluding me from your wedding?" I asked him, trying to have calm. His reaction was a bit defensive. He rubbed his forehead as if he was dealing with a headache, and then he dropped a response that honestly infuriated me. "It is that she feels that your presence could make her uncomfortable." I stared at him, hoping that he would continue, but that was all. Uncomfortable, that was all his justification to exclude from such an important day. I tried not to lose patience, but it was difficult. Uncomfortable, why? I insisted. "Have I done something that can justify this?" He sighed deeply, and after a moment of silence he admitted, "Look, I do not know how to explain it, but she feels that the family loves you more than her. She feels that they always talk about you, about your achievements, about your travels, and that makes her feel as if she could never be at your level." That confession left me frozen, not because it was true, but because it did not make sense. How could he blame me for something so irrational? It was absurd to think that I had any control over what my family said or did not say in the meeting. "That is not my fault," I responded, trying not to raise my voice. "I have never done anything to equip her, and if she feels that it is something that she has to solve with herself, not with me." My brother nodded, but said nothing. He only stayed looking at his coffee cup as if suddenly it was the most interesting thing in the world. Finally, after a long silence, I told him, "This is not right, and you know it. I am your sister, and I do not deserve this treatment." He looked at me with some guilt in his eyes, but he did not have the courage to give me an answer. I left his apartment feeling more frustrated than before. In the days that followed, I tried to continue with my life, although all this continued turning over in my head. It was as if I was being punished for something completely outside of my control. My frustration increased when rumors began to reach my ears. Apparently, my brother's fiancée not only had excluded me from the wedding, but was also spreading the word among the family members that I was a troublemaker and that I always tried to steal the spotlight. I was furious. I had never felt so powerless in my life. Not only were they marginalizing me, but now they were also trying to ruin my reputation within the family. The worst of all was that my mom did not do anything about it. When I mentioned to her what was happening, she simply said, "It is her wedding, and we have to respect her decisions." Of course, that only made me feel more isolated. The family that should support me seemed more interested in maintaining peace with my brother's fiancée than in defending what was right. The situation reached a critical point a week before the wedding when I received an unexpected call from my brother. From the tone of his voice, I knew immediately that something was wrong. He asked me to meet to talk, and although my first instinct was to tell him no, I ended up accepting because deep down he was still my brother. We met at a cafe near my house, and as soon as I saw him I knew that he was going through something serious. He seemed tired and tense, as if he had not slept in days. After a few minutes of awkward talk, he finally confessed the truth. "I am not sure that I want to continue forward with the wedding," he said, lowering his voice as if he feared that someone could hear us. I almost dropped the coffee cup. "Well, why?" I asked him, completely surprised. All this drama is not what I want for my life. I realize that she is obsessed with these things, with the comparisons, and I cannot take it anymore. I am starting to think that I made a mistake in committing." Although it hurt me to see my brother in that state, I could not help but feel a small spark of validation. At least he was beginning to realize that the problem was not me, but the toxic attitude of his fiancée. "If you are doubting now, you need to think seriously about what you want," I told him sincerely. "Do not let the pressure of the family or of what they will say force you to make a decision that does not make you happy." My brother nodded, but did not say much more. I left that meeting feeling a mixture of worry and relief. I did not know what was going to happen, but I had the feeling that everything was about to explode. Things exploded much faster than I imagined. 2 days after my conversation with my brother, I received a message from my mom asking me to go to her house. The meeting, according to her, was urgent. I decided to go, although I had my reservations. When I arrived, I found my mom, my dad, my brother, and of course his fiancée, all sitting in the living room with long faces. It seemed a scene taken from a bad movie. My mom took the floor first, her tone a mixture of exasperation and supplication. "We want to resolve this before the wedding. All this drama is affecting everyone, and we need you to do your part." Put on my part, one could barely believe what I was hearing. I had not done anything to create this situation, but now it seemed that all the responsibility for fixing it fell on me. I decided to remain silent and listen, although I felt that my patience was running out. My brother's fiancée was the next to speak. As was to be expected, she did not hold back. I think we all know what the problem is here. You always have to be the center of attention, always in every family gathering. It is always you who they talk about. And honestly, I do not want that energy to be present on my wedding day. The audacity of her statement left me stunned. I told her directly, and how exactly am I responsible for what the family decides to talk about? I do not control what they say or think. She crossed her arms as if my response was an excuse. It is your attitude, she continued. You are always traveling, you always have something interesting to tell, everyone admires you, and honestly, it makes me feel that I can never be at your level. There it was, finally the root of the problem was exposed: insecurity. But instead of working on it, she had decided to turn her internal problem into my fault. My brother, who until that moment had been silent, intervened. Enough is enough, this does not make sense. She has not done anything wrong. The atmosphere in the room became even more tense. The fiancé looked at him as if he had just betrayed her, while my parents exchanged nervous looks. My mom tried to calm the waters. Please do not fight, this does not help anyone. It was then when my brother said something that left me completely surprised. I do not know if I want to get married. The room was left in a sepulchral silence. You could have dropped a pin, and we would all have heard it. His fiancée was left mouth open, clearly trying to process what she had just said. What are you saying? She asked him, her voice trembling. My brother took a deep breath and continued. I am saying that I am not sure that this is what I want. All this fight, all this drama, should not be like this. This is not the type of that I want for my life. At that moment, my dad tried to intervene, but my brother stopped him, raising a hand. No, Dad, this is my decision, and I think I have to take some time to think. The fiancée, visibly altered, began to cry. She got up from the sofa and ran out, probably towards the bathroom. My mom followed her, leaving my dad, my brother, and me in the room, dealing with the awkward silence. Finally, my dad broke the silence. This cannot be happening. You know how much we have invested in this wedding. My brother turned towards him with a serious look. Really, that is what worries you, the money? My dad did not know what to respond. I, for my part, decided that it was time to leave. This was not my problem to fix, and clearly my presence was only complicating things. Before leaving, I gave a pat on the shoulder to my brother and told him, do what is best for you, no one else, live your life, only you. That same night, my brother called me. He told me that he had made his decision. He was going to cancel the wedding. According to him, that conversation in my parents' house was the final push that he needed to realize that he did not want to spend the rest of his life in a relationship that made him feel constantly trapped in the drama. I felt relieved for him, although I also knew that this was going to trigger a storm with my family. And as was to be expected, it did not take long before the consequences began to hit me directly. The next day, my mom called me furious. Are you happy now? She respected me. Your brother canceled the wedding, and it is all your fault. I tried to maintain calm, but the injustice of her accusation hurt me deeply. Mom, I did not tell him to cancel the wedding. That was his decision, and if he is making that decision, it is probably because he was not happy. You do not understand, she screamed. This is a shame for the whole family. How are we going to explain this to all the guests? It is not my problem, Mom. Maybe instead of blaming me, you should talk with him and try to support him. I hung up before she could respond. I was tired of being the scapegoat of the family problems. The days subsequent to the cancellation of the wedding were literally an absolute chaos. My phone did not stop ringing. My mom, my aunts, even cousins who barely spoke to me, all seemed to have something to say about what had happened. Deep down, I knew that what they wanted was not to talk, but to find someone to blame, and surprised that someone was me. My parents organized an impromptu family meeting in their house, supposedly to try to fix things. I was not consulted, they only informed me. I went because, to be honest, I was tired of the calls, and I wanted them to leave me in peace. When I arrived, the tension was palpable. My mom had that look that she always used when she wanted to make it seem that she had control, although clearly she did not have it. My dad was in his habitual mode of looking at the floor and nodding at everything that my mom said. But the worst was to see my brother and his now ex-fiancée sitting together on the sofa, as if all this was a kind of public trial, and I was in the dock. My mom was the first to speak with that melodramatic tone that she always uses when she wants to make a show. We are here because the family is falling apart, and we need everyone to do their part to fix this. I looked at my brother, hoping for some kind of support, but he was completely silent. It was evident that he was uncomfortable, but he did not seem willing to intervene. The ex-fiancée, however, did not have any problem in speaking. This is what happens when a person does not know when you stay in her place, she said, looking directly at me. Your need for attention has destroyed what could have been a beautiful wedding. My hands closed in fists on my legs, trying to contain myself. Patience is not my forte, and at that moment I felt that they were setting me up. First of all, I said, maintaining my voice as calm as possible, "I did not destroy anything. If your relationship could not withstand this, Tao, Vez, you should ask yourself if it really was destined to last." That made her burst. She jumped up and began to scream about how I had poisoned my brother against her, about how I had always been a shadow in her relationship. My parents, instead of stopping her, seemed to agree with every word that she said. "And you," I told my parents, unable to contain myself. "More really, you think that this is my fault? I did nothing more than exist. All this drama has nothing to do with me. But you are more comfortable blaming me than facing reality." The silence that followed was heavy. My mom opened her mouth to respond, but my brother finally intervened. "Enough," he shouted, something that he had never done in my life. "I am fed up with everyone blaming my sister for this. The reason why I canceled the wedding is because I was not happy. It has nothing to do with her and everything to do with what I feel about this relationship." The ex-fiancé looked at him as if he had just betrayed her, but she said nothing, probably because deep down she knew that he was right. "And Mom," Dad continued, "if you cannot accept that this was my decision, then that is your problem. But stop using my sister as a scapegoat." The room was left in an uncomfortable silence. Nobody knew what to say. Finally, my mom, visibly upset, got up and left the room, followed by my dad. The ex-fiancé also left shortly after, leaving my brother and me alone in the room. "Thank you for defending me," I told him, feeling a little relieved that at least he was on my side. "I should not have let it get to this," he responded. "I am sorry that I did not do something before." The following days were strange. My family seemed to be divided into two sides: those who supported my brother and those who blamed the bad influence that, according to them, was me. Some aunts stopped talking to me, and one of my cousins even blocked me on social media. Too dramatic could they be? But honestly, I did not care. For the first time in a long time, I felt that I had done the right thing by not yielding to the absurd demands of my family. However, the drama did not end there. A week later, my brother called me to tell me that his ex-fiancée was trying to repair the relationship. Apparently, she was pressuring my parents to help her convince him to reconcile. My parents being, as there did not take long to get involved. My mom called me once more, but this time with a request that really left me stunned. "You need to talk with your brother and tell him to reconsider." I laughed because I did not know how to react to something so ridiculous. "Sorry, you want me to tell him to go back with someone who clearly does not make him happy?" "It is not about that," said my mom with that tone that she used when she tried to manipulate me. "It is for the family. We have already lost enough, and fixing this would make everything return to normal." That was when I realized that the normality for my family was an endless cycle of blames, manipulations, and appearance, and I did not want to be part of that. "Mom, I am sorry, but I am not going to do that. My brother has the right to be happy, and if that means not getting married, then we must respect him." I hung up before she could respond. I knew that there was probably going to be consequences, but I did not care. Things did not improve with my parents. But for the first time in years, my brother and I felt more united. He thanked me for supporting him. Although he was still dealing with the emotional aftershocks of the breakup, he was beginning to build a new life. The drama had reached a standstill, but I knew that my relationship with my parents would never be the same. Several weeks passed after the final explosion, and although everything seemed to have reached a standstill, the aftershocks continued to be present. My parents, who normally flooded my phone with calls and messages, barely communicated with me. When they did, they were brief and tense conversations full of innuendos and passive-aggressive comments. My mom kept insisting that I had destroyed the family, while my dad, as always, simply remained silent. The only thing that kept me sane in all this was my relationship with my brother. Since he canceled the wedding, we had gotten much closer. For the first time in years, I felt that I could really talk with him without the barriers that always seemed to be present in our family. He had moved to a small apartment in the center and was focusing on himself, something that he had never had the opportunity to do while he was with Sue. One day, while we were having coffee in his new place, he told me something that left me thinking. "You know, all this, although it was crazy, helped me to see things more clearly, not only about my relationship, but about our family." I raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "What do you mean?" "We have always been a complicated family, but I think I never realized how toxic they can be until now. I always thought that it was normal to yield to maintain the peace, to follow Mom's plan, but I cannot do it anymore." His words resonated in me because in many ways it was something that I myself had felt for years, although I had never expressed it so clearly. I told him that I understood how he felt, and that although it was painful sometimes to take distance from the family, it was necessary to protect yourself. Meanwhile, my brother's ex-fiancée had not given up. She had begun to appear in family reunions without prior notice, acting as if she was still part of our life. My parents, of course, received her with open arms, which only added more tension to an already uncomfortable situation. One day, my mom even had the audacity to suggest that the inviting her of drama. "You are so selfish," my mom yelled on the phone loudly enough for me to hear from the other side of the habitation. "All this is your sister's fault, and now you are also walking away." When my brother hung up, I saw him more upset than ever. He looked at me, "Why?" said, "I think we need to set real limits." That was the first time that we spoke seriously about the idea of walking away completely from my parents. It was not an easy decision despite everything that had happened. They were still our family, and cutting ties completely was something that filled us with guilt, but we also knew that continuing allowing their manipulations was not sustainable. The final decision arrived a few weeks later when I received a message from my mom saying that they were organizing a reconciliation meeting in her house. According to her, the idea was to resolve all the tensions and rebuild the family. But the detail that ruined everything was that she had also invited my brother's ex-fiancée without consulting him. When I showed the message to my brother, he laughed with bitterness. "This is not about reconciliation, it is about control," and he was right. Our mom was not interested in repairing relationships in a genuine way. What she wanted was to force us to follow a script that she had written, one in which everything returned to normal, no matter how much damage she had caused us. It was at that moment when we made a definitive decision. We were going to walk away, not permanently, but enough to create a distance that allowed us to heal. We wrote a joint message to our parents explaining that we needed space, that we loved them, but that we could not continue allowing that their expectations and manipulations dictate our lives. We told them that we would be open to talking in the future as long as the conversations were respectful and genuine. The response was nothing surprising. My mom accused us of being ungrateful, of not valuing everything that they had done for us. My dad has always said nothing, but we remained firm. Some months have passed since then, and although things are still a little complicated, I feel that I am finally in a place of peace. My brother and I continue supporting each other mutually, and we have begun to build a stronger relationship, one that is not gone by the expectations of our family. My parents, on the other hand, have tried to contact us a couple of times, but always with the same tone of guilt and manipulation, so for now, we continue maintaining the distance. And as for my brother's ex-fiancée, well, I have heard that she is dating someone new, and I sincerely hope that she finds happiness, but I am glad that she is no longer part of our lives. Story 5. My mom gave our family coffee shop to my lazy sister instead of me. Weeks later, a customer got sick from bad food, and now she's begging me to save it before it closes. After decades of running the coffee shop that she founded with my dad, she finally decided it was time to retire and pass the torch to the next generation. For me, it was clear who would take the reins. I would. Since I was 22 years old, I left my job at a law firm to dedicate myself to working with my mom and learning everything about the business. The coffee shop is not a simple neighborhood cafeteria. It is a special place that has become the heart of our small town in Ohio. We have loyal customers who have been coming for years, and our unique blend of coffee has earned a place in everyone's heart. The plan was always that I would inherit the business. Mom never said it out loud, but after years of learning every detail, innovating with new recipes, and helping to expand the coffee shop's social media, I assumed that it was the logical thing. My younger sister, on the other hand, never showed interest in the place. She was always more of a creative type. She spent more time doing photo sessions of decorative lattes for Instagram than learning how to manage inventories or deal with suppliers. After dropping out of 2 college degrees and several jobs, she decided that she needed time to find her purpose. That time basically meant staying at home, painting occasionally, and letting my parents take care of her expenses. So imagine my surprise and fury when in the middle of the retirement party my mom took the microphone and announced that it would be my sister who would take command of the coffee shop. The entire room went silent. Some employees looked at me as if waiting for me to say something, but I was paralyzed. My sister, of course, stood up and smiled as if she had just won a lottery prize. She even raised her glass and said, "It is an honor to take the family legacy and take it to the next level." I could not stay any longer. I left the coffee shop without looking back, with tears in my eyes and my heart broken into pieces. Hours later, my mom called me. She told me that she understood that I was hurt, but that she had decided to give my sister the opportunity because they wanted to motivate her to be more responsible. According to her, I would always be the support in case things got out of control. Support after 5 years dedicated to the coffee shop. She expected me to be my sister's nanny while she played at being a manager. I told her that I was disappointed and that if she wanted to give the business away, she would also have to deal with the consequences alone. I made it clear that I would not set foot in the coffee shop again. Since then, I cut off all contact with my mom and my sister, although I continued speaking with my dad, who did not agree with the decision, but decided to remain neutral. I refused to listen to news about the coffee shop, but a few days ago my dad called me to tell me that things had gotten out of control. After my dad's call, I knew that something bad was happening. He told me that my mom was on the verge of a nervous breakdown and that the coffee shop that had always been the pride of the family was falling apart. It turns out that my sister, with all her enthusiasm and zero experience, had made catastrophic decisions since the first day. To begin with, she fired several key employees who had been with us for years because, according to her, the place needed a younger vibe. She hired a group of her friends, none of whom knew absolutely anything about how to manage a coffee shop, but that was not the worst. She decided to change several of the classic recipes that our customers loved simply because she found them outdated. She removed from the menu our famous carrot cake, the one that literally brought dozens of customers every week, and replaced it with vegan and gluten-free options that, according to the reviews that I could read on the internet, tasted like cardboard. And to make matters worse, my sister had the brilliant idea of saving costs by buying cheaper products. This meant using low-quality milk that, according to the comments on Yelp, completely ruined the taste of our coffees. To make matters worse, she forgot to verify the expiration dates of the products, something that had always been a priority for me. The collapse came last week when a regular customer ordered his coffee with almond milk, and unknowingly, they served him regular milk because the almond one ran out, and we did not want to lose the order. The customer was lactose intolerant and ended up in the emergency room with a severe episode. The news spread like wildfire. Not only were there publications on social media denouncing the incident, but also an article appeared in the local newspaper titled "From Community Favorite to Health Hazard: What Happened to the Star Coffee Shop." My mom was desperate. According to my dad, she was spending sleepless nights trying to find a solution. But my sister continued acting as if it were not her fault. Supposedly, she had told my mom all this is the fault of exaggerated customers. Besides, managing a business is more difficult than it seems. That was what led my mom to call me. It was the first time that we spoke since that fateful retirement party. Her voice sounded exhausted and tense, and without any beating around the bush, she asked me to return to the coffee shop. According to her, I was the only one who could save the place before it was too late. I replied that I was not interested. I reminded her how she had publicly humiliated me by overlooking me in favor of my sister, and that although I loved the coffee shop, I could not simply return as if nothing had happened. But then my mom did something that I did not expect. She began to cry. She told me that she had been wrong, that she had made a terrible decision for the wrong reasons, and that she was willing to do anything to make amends, even offered to give me total control of the coffee shop if I returned, promising that my sister would not get involved in the operations again. For a moment, I felt satisfaction. After all, this was exactly what I had warned would happen, but I also felt trapped. I loved the coffee shop, and the idea of seeing it disappear was unbearable. However, my pride was still hurt. I told her that I would think about it, and hung up the phone. That night, I could not sleep. I stayed thinking about everything that we had built in the coffee shop and the customers who trusted us, and in how much I loved being behind the counter, making each visit to the place special. But I also remembered the humiliation and the pain that I had felt that day. The next day, I received another unexpected call, this time from one of our oldest employees. He told me that he had resigned, unable to stand my sister's decisions, but that he was willing to return if I returned. He told me that most of the employees missed my leadership and were willing to give me a second opportunity if I decided to take command. I felt a knot in my stomach. I knew that if I did not act quickly, the coffee shop could close forever, but I still had conditions to meet before even considering returning. After listening to what was happening in the coffee shop, I knew that I could not leave things like that, but I also knew that returning would not be so simple. If I was going to take control and save the business, I needed the rules to be clear from the beginning, and that included a public apology from my mom and a total withdrawal of my sister from any role inside the coffee shop. That same night, I called my mom. I did not want to waste time with beating around the bush, so I went straight. If you want me to come back, these are my conditions. I want you and my sister to admit publicly before the employees and the community that you made a mistake. In addition, I need total control of the coffee shop, nothing of my sister helping or having a voice in the decisions. Everything passes through me. For a moment, there was silence on the other side of the line. Finally, my mom sighed and said, I will do what is necessary. What you ask me is difficult, but I understand that it is fair. Just please come back. The coffee shop will not survive without you. However, when it came time to talk with my sister, the conversation was much more tense. She was not willing to admit her mistakes, much less to apologize. In fact, when I explained to her what I needed her to do, she laughed sarcastically and told me, seriously, you think that I am going to kneel before everyone just because things did not turn out as you planned? I responded without losing calm. This does not have to do with me. It has to do with the coffee shop and the community that you have defrauded. If you do not want to apologize, it is okay, but you will not have anything more to do with this business. That statement took her out of her mind. She began to scream that I was a controller, that I had always been our parents' favorite, and that now I was taking advantage of the situation. I did not try to argue with her. I knew that it was not worth it. The next day, my mom convened a meeting with the employees in the coffee shop to discuss the situation, and as I asked to officially give me control of the place. I arrived early, nervous about what could happen, but determined to do the right thing. My mom stood in front of everyone and began to speak. It was difficult to see her admit that she had made a bad decision, but it was noticeable that she was being sincere. I know that the last months have been difficult for everyone, and I want to assume the responsibility for my mistakes. I thought that I was doing the best for our family and our business, but I was wrong. Today I am here to rectify that. Then she looked at me and added, I am handing over the coffee shop to who really should have been in charge from the beginning. From now on, she will have total control, and I hope that everyone supports her as they have always done. Some employees applauded, and others looked at me with a mixture of relief and hope. But what surprised me most was to see my sister standing at the back of the room. I did not expect her to come, but there she was with her arms crossed and an expression of evident annoyance. When it was my turn to speak, I took a deep breath and I took a step forward. I know that this last month has been a chaos. Some of you felt abandoned, and others even left the coffee shop for what was happening. The only thing that I can promise is that I will do everything possible to give this place back the stability and the respect that it deserves. I cannot do it alone, so I need us to be the team that we were before again. The response was positive. I felt the support of the majority, although I knew that it would not be easy to earn their trust again. The meeting ended con a strong applause, but my sister did not stay to listen to the end. She left the coffee shop before I finished speaking, and although I wanted to feel upset, I only felt relieved. I knew that with her out of the way, I would have a real opportunity to fix things. That same afternoon, I began to review the financial mess that my sister had left. The numbers were horrible. The coffee shop was losing money at an alarming rate. Not only had sales dropped, but the negative reviews were seriously affecting our reputation. The list of problems seemed endless. The inventory was disorganized. Some suppliers had canceled our contracts for lack of payments, and there were new employees who had no idea how to handle the basic operations of the place. It was evident that I would have to make drastic decisions to save the business. Taking control of the coffee shop was one thing. Fixing the chaos that my sister had left was another, completely different. That first week back was a whirlwind of emotions, difficult decisions, and sleepless nights. I knew that if I wanted to save the place, I would have to act fast and take measures that would probably not please everyone. My first move was to gather the remaining employees for a frank conversation. We needed to rebuild trust as a team and establish a clear plan to straighten the course. I began apologizing, not because I felt that I had done something wrong, but because I understood that they had suffered the impact of the mismanagement. I know that the last weeks have been a disaster, I told them, but I am here to make sure that this coffee shop returns to being what it was. We are going to make changes, and I need you to trust me. I know that it is much to ask after what has happened, but I want you to know that every decision that I make will be for the good of the team and of the business. One of the oldest employees, a barista who had worked with us since the beginning, raised his hand. Does that mean that we return to the original recipes? Because sincerely, those new things that your sister put were killing the soul of the place. I smiled. Yes, from today we return to the classic, and not only that, we will also bring back some of the things that the customers have been asking for, like our carrot cake. That seemed to calm everyone a little, And although I knew that there was still some skepticism, I was determined to earn their trust with actions, not only with words. The next step was to face the financial problem. I reviewed all the pending accounts. I spoke with the suppliers who had stopped working with us and negotiated new agreements. Some were willing to give us a second opportunity, but others had felt so burned by the lack of payments that they refused. That was a hard blow, but I committed to find new suppliers that met our standards. I also reviewed the menu. There were too many elements that did not represent what the coffee shop was, things that my sister had added to try to modernize the place, but that in reality only confused the customers. I decided to simplify it, focusing on the classics that had always been our best sellers and adding only a couple of new options that really fit with the essence of the place. The biggest challenge, however, was to repair our reputation. The negative reviews on Yelp, Google, and social media were killing us. There were customers who swore never to return after their bad experiences, and recover their trust would not be easy. I decided to face the problem head on. I published a message on the coffee shop social media admitting that we had made mistakes, but also promising that we were working hard to correct them. Dear community, in the last weeks we have gone through difficult moments, and we understand that many of you have felt disappointed. We want to be honest with you. We know that we have failed in maintaining the standards that you expect and deserve, but we are committed to do things right. We have made important changes in the management, and we are working to give the coffee shop back the soul that it always had. We ask you for another opportunity to demonstrate to you that we are still the place that you love. Thanks for your patience and support. The response was better than I expected. Some comments continued being critical, but many others were from customers who appreciated our honesty and said they were willing to give us another opportunity. However, the most unexpected thing arrived a couple of days later when a regular customer who had stopped coming after my sister's changes entered the coffee shop. He was an older man who always ordered the same coffee with an almond croissant and who had left a negative review when we eliminated the croissant from the menu. Back to the classic, he asked while looking at the updated menu board. I nodded yes, and the almond croissant is back if you want one. He smiled and asked for his usual. That simple interaction filled me with esperanza. If I could recover even one of our loyal customers, I knew that there was hope for the coffee shop. The real challenge, however, came with the new employees. Many of them were not up to the standards that we needed, and although I tried to train them, it was evident that some simply did not fit in. I had to make the difficult decision of firing some of them and look for more committed and experienced people. It was hard but necessary. At home, things were also tense. Although my mom tried to demonstrate her support, there was an evident discomfort between us. My sister, on the other hand, had decided to ignore me completely. She moved temporarily with a friend, and according to my dad, she was furious with me for having ruined her opportunity. Despite everything, little by little, I began to see improvements. Sales increased slightly, the reviews began to change, and the employees seemed more united, but I knew that there was still much to do before the coffee shop was completely out of danger. Then, just when things were beginning to stabilize, something happened that I did not expect. A key customer, one of the most important suppliers in the city, made me an offer that could change everything. It was a Tuesday afternoon when I received a call from the supplier that had always been key for the coffee shop. We had worked with them for years before my sister took care of the business and left the accounts unpaid. It was a big surprise when the manager, someone with whom I had always had a solid professional relationship, asked me to meet in person that same afternoon. I received him at the coffee shop. We sat at one of the tables next to the window with 2 cups of freshly prepared coffee. His tone was kind but direct, and he did not take long to get to the point. I know that the coffee shop has had some problems recently, and I also know that you are back in charge. We want to work with you again. But it is not only that we have a proposal that could benefit both of us. I listened to him attentively while he explained his idea. It turns out that his company was looking to partner with a local coffee shop to launch a special line of coffee blends that could be sold in supermarkets. They wanted to use a place with history and reputation, and despite the recent problems, the Star Coffee Shop was still a recognized name in the community. Basically, we want the Star Coffee Shop to be the face of our new line. He said, we know that you are making a huge effort to recover the reputation of the place, and we believe that this could help to put the coffee shop back on the map. It would be a long-term collaboration with significant financial benefits for both. I was left mouth open. The offer was literally what we needed to secure the future of the coffee shop. It not only meant additional income, but also a way to restore the confidence of the community by partnering with a respected brand. However, there was a problem. We needed to demonstrate that the coffee shop was functioning perfectly before the agreement could be closed. That meant consistent sales, impeccable operations, and a solid reputation. Basically, I had a deadline of months to take the place to that standard, or we would lose the opportunity. I accepted the challenge. The next day, I convened a meeting with all the employees to explain the situation to them. I told them that this was our golden opportunity, but that we would need to work harder than ever to achieve it. This coffee shop means a lot to me, and I am sure that it also means a lot to you. I told them if we achieve this, we will not only save the business, but we will take it to a completely new level. But I need everyone to be committed to 100%. The response was positive. Even some employees who had shown skepticism at the beginning seemed excited about the possibility of being part of something big. The next step was to intensify our marketing efforts. I began to publish constant content on our social media, showing not only our products, but also the process behind it. I showed our baristas preparing the coffee with care, to our cooks baking the classic cakes, and to the customers enjoying their experience in the coffee shop. I also organized a series of events at the coffee shop to attract more people, from trivia nights to art workshops, anything that could bring the community back to the place. Fortunately, it worked. Sales began to increase week by week, and every day I saw new faces entering through the door. But as always, not everything was perfect. My sister decided to publish on her social media a video criticizing the changes that I was making in the coffee shop. In the video, she complained that I was ruining her creative vision, and that I was only interested in maintaining the status quo. Although at first it infuriated me, I decided not to respond. I knew that it was not worth it to engage in a public fight, especially when we were making so much progresso. Instead of that, I concentrated on continuing improving. I hired 2 new experienced employees to cover the positions that were still vacant, and I went back to work personally at the counter some days. I wanted to be present not only as a manager, but as part of the team. After 2 months of hard work, we finally reached the point where things began to feel normal again. The online reviews were mostly positive, the regular customers had returned, and the coffee shop was generating enough income to cover our pending debts. The day that I presented the final report to the supplier, I felt a mixture of relief and pride. We had complied with all the requirements, and now the coffee shop, not only was it safe, but it was about to expand to something bigger. The news of the collaboration was received with enthusiasm by our customers and employees. To celebrate it, we organized a special event at the coffee shop, offering free samples of the new blends and thanking everyone for their support. Looking back, I realized that it had been the hardest path that I had traveled, but also the most rewarding. I had saved the legacy of my family, but more importantly, I had demonstrated that hard work, passion, and a united team could overcome any obstacle. And although my relationship with my sister continued being tense, I learned to let go of the resentment. I did not need her to move forward, and she was free to follow her path as she wanted. The Star Coffee Shop had returned stronger than ever, and there was nothing that could stop us now. Story 6. My spoiled brother demanded that I finance his dreamed gaming setup after years of torment. When I refused, he spread lies about me, so I exposed his dark business to everyone. I, Olivia, am 24 years old, and the reason for sharing this story here is simple. I am exhausted of my older brother, Mateo. He is 28 years old, but sometimes he seems to have stopped maturing at 15. We grew up in Charlotte, North Carolina, in a modest house with parents who always tried to do their best. But since I have memory, Mateo found ways to turn my life into a personal hell. Mateo was the typical older brother who had the gift of getting away with anything. If something broke, he always had an excuse that worked. I remember one time when I was 7 years old, and he was 11, he broke a vase playing with a ball in the living room. Without hesitating, he told Mom that it had been me, and before I could defend myself, I was already punished without television for a week. That was one of the first times that I realized how Mateo always managed to manipulate our parents. As we grew up, his behavior only worsened. Mateo was the king of the house, or at least that is how he behaved. Everything revolved around him. My parents tried to be fair, but Mateo always knew how to get their attention. When he had to do something like school tasks or household chores, he would complain until someone else did it for him. Normally, that someone was me. When we arrived at high school, things became even more difficult. Mateo began to stand out socially. He was charismatic, athletic, and always had a group of friends around him. Meanwhile, I was more reserved and focused on my studies. This did not bother me, but Mateo always found a way to make me feel inferior. If he brought friends home, he would tell them things like, "Do not make noise, Olivia starts crying for anything," or "Do not pay attention to her, she is always with her nose in the books," and of course everyone would laugh. Mateo was also an expert in belittling anything that excited me. Once when I was 14 years old, I won an art contest at school. I was very happy and wanted to show my drawing to my parents. While I was showing them, Mateo burst into the room saying that he had scored an incredible goal in the soccer game of that day. My parents turned towards him excited and my achievement was completely forgotten. It was not the first time that something like that happened, but it was definitely one of the ones that hurt the most. Over time, I began to realize that Mateo was not only an egocentric, but also a manipulator. If things did not go as he wanted, he made sure to ruin it for everyone else. Once when I was 15 years old and he was 19, I tried to convince my parents to let me go to a summer science camp. It was something that I really wanted to do, but Mateo intervened saying that it was a waste of money and that he would prefer that they use that money for a family vacation. In the end, I did not go to the camp, and there was no vacation either. He simply stayed at home playing video games all summer. When Mateo finished high school, my parents offered him to pay for college, but he rejected it, saying that the educational system was a scam. My parents were disappointed, but tried to support him. They bought him a new computer thinking that he could use it to explore his interests and maybe learn something useful. Instead, he used it to play video games all day and upload mediocre videos that nobody watched. Despite that, my parents continued treating him as if he were a misunderstood genius. For my part, one focused on my studies and managed to obtain a partial scholarship for a university in Massachusetts. My parents were proud, but Mateo did not miss the opportunity to belittle me. He told me that they had only given me the scholarship because universities have to comply with a gender quota, as if my hard work had nothing to do. His words hurt me, but I tried not to pay attention to him. In college, I finally felt some relief being away from Mateo. I could focus on myself without his constant criticism, but every time I returned home during the holidays, the cycle would repeat. Mateo continued living with my parents without a job or clear plans for the future. Every conversation with him ended up being an argument. My parents were worried, but they did not know how to help him or simply did not want to face him. The winter holidays of last year began, as always, I returning home after an exhausting semester. Mateo, sitting on the sofa with his video game controller in his hand, and my parents trying to maintain peace between us, but this time things took an unexpected turn. From the moment I crossed the door, Mateo did not waste time in beginning with his sarcastic comments. "Oh, look who arrived, the Miss Perfect student. I hope you do not bring more of those boring stories about how difficult university life is. Some of us have real problems, Olivia," he blurted out while he did not even lift his gaze from his screen. I bit my tongue and tried to ignore him as always. Everything exploded a few days later when we were in the living room after dinner. Mateo, with his typical attitude of superiority, mentioned casually that he was thinking of setting up a professional gaming setup. My parents, curious but cautious, asked him what that meant exactly. Mateo, excited, explained that he wanted to buy a state-of-the-art PC, an ultra-panoramic monitor, LED lights, and all kinds of expensive accessories. According to him, with that equipment, he could become a famous streamer. "And how do you plan to pay for all that?" asked my mom, clearly worried. Mateo shrugged. "Well, here comes the good part. Olivia can help me. She does not have so many expenses at university thanks to her scholarship. It is the least she could do as a sister." I was left to Tony Tar. Really, had he just suggested that I finance his expensive streamer dream? At first I thought he was joking, but his serious expression made it clear that he was speaking seriously. "I do not have money to spend on your whims, Mateo," I replied firmly. "I am working part-time only to cover my own expenses. Besides, why should I help you finance something that is not even remotely necessary?" Mateo leaned back on the sofa, offended. "Really, you are so selfish. I am trying to build something for my future, and you with your magic scholarship cannot make a small sacrifice for your brother. This is what always happens, Olivia." First, Mateo never. My parents tried to intervene to calm things down, but Mateo did not stop shouting. "It is unfair. Olivia always gets what she wants. I never had opportunities like hers, and now she cannot even help me a little." "Opportunities," one responded, feeling that my patience was running out. "Mateo, our parents offered you to pay for your university, but you rejected it. They bought you a computer so that you did something productive, but you used it to play all day. You cannot blame me for your own decisions." Mateo got up from the sofa furious. You are an ungrateful. You know what I should have imagined that you were not going to help me. You have always been a traitor, Olivia. The discussion ended with Mateo leaving the room, slamming the door. My parents tried to console me, but I was too angry. How could someone be so selfish and manipulative? The worst of all was that I knew that Mateo was not going to leave it there. The following days were a chaos. Mateo, resentful for my refusal, began to spread rumors among our extended family. He said that I had forgotten about my roots and that I treated everyone as if they were inferior because I was at the university. My uncles and cousins began to call me to ask me por qué I did not want to help Mateo. He had painted a picture where I was the villain, and of course the story looked much more convincing from his manipulative perspective, but the worst was yet to come. A couple of weeks later, while I was checking my email, I saw an anonymous message. When I opened it, I almost could not believe what I was seeing. It was a screenshot of a publication on a local forum where Mateo had put my phone number, alleging that I was a tutor available and that I was looking for new clients for private classes. Mateo had created a fake profile using my name, my photos, and had filled it with completely invented information. Immediately, I confronted him. What the hell is this, Mateo? Why would you publish something like that? Mateo, sitting in his gaming chair as if he did not have a worry in the world, did not even try to deny it. Oh, do not get so dramatic. I only wanted to give you a little publicity. You should be grateful. I was furious. Not only had he used my personal information without permission, but he was also putting my safety at risk. I called my parents to explain to them what Mateo had done, and although they were horrified, they did not know what to do, as Mateo seemed to have a way to get away with it. After what Mateo did with my phone number, I decided that it was enough. I had endured his abuses and manipulations all my life, but this time he had gone too far. His fake publication had not only exposed my privacy, but had also caused strangers to contact me, constantly asking for private classes that obviously I was not offering. I could not let this Kedara unpunished. My parents tried to talk with him again, but Mateo took it as if it were a joke. It is not a big deal. Why are you getting so sensitive? He said with his typical arrogant attitude. The worst of all is that, as always, my parents did not know how to handle him. They were trapped in that cycle of wanting to support him, but also frustrated by his behavior. Meanwhile, I was planning something. Mateo had always been a master of lies and manipulations, but this time I was going to use his own weapons against him. The key was in a small detail that I had discovered accidentally months ago. One afternoon, while I was looking for something on the house computer, I stumbled upon a file on the desktop called Orders. At first, I thought it was something boring, but out of curiosity, I opened it. To my surprise, it was a detailed record of online transactions. It seemed that Mateo had been earning money selling something, but they were not normal products. In the file, there were lists of names, addresses, and articles, such as brand headphones, Bluetooth speakers, and cell phones. The problem was that many of these articles were extremely cheap in comparison with their real price of market. After investigating a little more, I realized what was happening. Mateo was buying counterfeit products of dubious origin and reselling these articles as if they were original. He did it through groups on social media and local forums. He had an entire scheme set up, and he did not even hide it too much. At that moment, I did not give it too much importance. I did not want to get involved in his problems. And while it did not affect my family, I preferred to stay on the sidelines. But now, after his last move against me, I had the perfect excuse to expose him. If he wanted to continue ruining my reputation and getting me into trouble, I could also play dirty. During the following days, I compiled all the information that I could about Mateo's business. I reviewed his order file, I took screenshots of his publications on social media, and I even found complaints from buyers in a local group who accused him of having sold them defective products. I kept all this evidence in a folder on my computer. I was not going to use it immediately, but I wanted to have everything ready for when the moment arrived. Meanwhile, Mateo continued behaving as if he had not done anything wrong. In a family dinner, he did not miss the opportunity to mock me. How is going to university career, Olivia? Are they paying you for being so perfect? He said with a cynical smile, while my parents sighed, clearly uncomfortable. No, Mateo, I replied calmly. But at least I am not selling garbage on the internet to earn money. His smile disappeared immediately, and I could see a flash of concern in his eyes, but I did not say anything more. It was not the moment yet. The perfect opportunity arrived a few weeks later when Mateo organized a small meeting at home to show his new gaming project to his friend. He had managed to convince my parents to lend him money to buy some pieces for his setup, although he continued without working or contributing with anything at home. While he and his friends were in the living room laughing and testing his brand new ultra-panoramic monitor, I was in my room ready to act. I had created an anonymous email with which I sent the evidence collected about his business to several local groups, including the forum where he used to sell his products. I also shared the information with a couple of buyers who had commented about their bad experiences to make sure that it reached more people. I also published the information in a social media group that I knew that Matteo frequented. It did not take long before the consequences began to arrive. That same night, while I was having dinner with my parents, Matteo entered furious to the kitchen. His phone was ringing constantly, and his face was red with rage. "Who the hell is spreading lies about me?" he shouted, throwing his phone on the table. "They are saying that I sell fake things, that I am a scammer." "Is not that what you do?" I replied calmly, while taking a sip of water. Matteo looked at me with his eyes narrowed as if he was trying to read my mind. "What did you say?" he asked, his voice trembling with fury. "I did not say anything that is not true," I continued, "but if you want to discuss it, maybe you should worry more about how to fix your disaster." My parents were completely confused, but Matteo was on the verge of exploding. He knew that he did not have evidence to accuse me directly, but he also knew that I knew enough as to be dangerous. After my revelation, Matteo's world began to fall apart quickly. The publications in the local groups and forums that he used to frequent were filled with furious comments from people who claimed to have been scammed. Some even mentioned having reported Matteo to the local authorities for fraud. Although I did not know if these denunciations would have immediate legal consequences, it was clear that Matteo's reputation was completely destroyed. At the beginning, Matteo tried to defend himself in the forums. He published messages saying that everything was a misunderstanding, that the products that he sold were second-hand, and that he had never tried to deceive anyone. But lost screenshots of the conversations where he promised new and original articles were proof enough to deny him. The people were furious, and his attempts to save his image only worsened things. At home, Matteo was increasingly irritable. He spent most of the time locked in his room, shouting on the phone, with someone probably trying to calm his enraged customers. My parents were baffled and worried. They did not understand completely what was happening, but they knew that something serious had gone wrong. A few days after the scandal broke, Matteo tuvo a direct confrontation with me. He knocked on the door of my habita and entered without waiting for an invitation. "You did this," he shouted, pointing at me with his finger. His face was red, and I could see the desperation in his eyes. "It was you who spread all those lies about me." I raised an eyebrow, feigning surprise. "What makes you think that, Matteo? Are not your own actions the ones that got you into trouble?" "Do not play dumb," Olivia roared. "Too have always been jealous of me. I knew that you would do something to ruin me." I could not help laughing. "Jealous of what exactly, Matteo? Of what that you live with our parents at 28 years old without doing anything useful? Of what that you spend the time complaining while playing video games all day, please?" Matteo seemed about to explode, but he did not have evidence to accuse me directly. He only knew that someone had exposed him, and I was the most obvious suspect. My parents arrived running out, listening to the shouts. "What is happening here?" asked my mother, visibly distressed. Matteo began to explain, exaggerating as always, saying that someone was defaming him and that he was losing everything through the fault of. But for the first time, my parents were not buying completely his story. "Matteo," my dad intervened, with a tone severo, "we need to talk seriously about what is happening. Is it true that you were selling counterfeit products?" Matteo tried to deny it, but the evidence was too overwhelming. When my dad showed him screenshots of the publications that circulated online, he had no choice but to admit it, although he tried to justify himself, saying that he only estaba trying to earn some money. His parents were clearly disappointed. "And what did you expect to happen?" asked my dad, crossing his arms. "You were deceiving people, de verdad. Did you think that that was going to end well?" Matteo had no answer. For the first time, he seemed to realize the magnitude of his actions. The following days were a disaster for him. The forums where he used to sell blocked him permanently, and several enraged buyers began to ask for reimbursement. Matteo obviously did not have money to return, what only aggravated the situation. One night, I heard my parents arguing about what to do with him. "We cannot continue maintaining him like this," said my dad with firmness. "He has to find a job and start assuming responsibilities." "But where will he go if we kick him out?" responded my mom, worried. "He has nowhere to go." "That is not our problem," replied my dad. "We have given him enough opportunities. If he does not learn now, he will never do it." That was the first time that I saw my parents really face Matteo. They decided that if he did not find a job in a month, he would have to move out. Mateo, of course, tried to resist. He said that they were being cruel and that they did not understand how difficult it was for him. But my parents did not yield this time. Meanwhile, I was busy enjoying my small triumph. Although I knew that I should not rejoice in someone else's misfortune, I could not help feeling vindicated. Mateo had spent years making my life impossible, and now he was finally facing the consequences of his actions. One afternoon, while I was checking my emails, I found a message from one of the buyers affected by Mateo. It was a person who had lost a considerable sum of money in one of his products. He thanked me for exposing him, saying that I had saved many people from being scammed. Knowing that I had done something good in the middle of all this gave me some pause. Mateo was not one of those who accepted defeat with grace. Barely a few weeks after my parents gave him the ultimatum to get a job, he appeared with a brilliant idea. According to him, he was going to organize a video game tournament in the city, something that supposedly would generate him enough money to cover his debts and demonstrate to everyone that he was not a failure. Of course, this idea was full of problems from the beginning. First, he had no experience organizing events nor money to rent a space. Second, he was relying on the same friends and contacts that he had defrauded recently wanted to collaborate with him. But the worst of all was that Mateo expected me to help him one afternoon. He approached me with his manipulative tone of always, "Look, Olivia, I know that we had our disagreements, but this could benefit both of us. You are good at organizing things, and I have the vision. If we work together, we could make this something big." I could not believe what I was listening to. After all that he had done, he still had the nerve to ask me for help. Diverdad, do you think that I am going to get involved in another of your ridiculous ideas, Mateo? I replied, "You cannot even handle your own problems, and now you want me to help you with this? No thanks." His face changed instantly, passing from a false laugh to an expression of anger. "Sabia, I knew that I could not count on you. You have always been selfish, Olivia. All that you do is think about yourself." "Selfish?" I laughed with incredulity. "Who is the one who has been living with our parents without contributing anything? Who is the one who spends the time blaming others for their own failures, Mateo? If someone here is selfish, it is you." He did not respond. Instead, he left the room furious, mumbling something about how he would manage alone. Mateo continued forward with his tournament idea, but as was to be expected, it did not take long to go wrong. Barely a few weeks later, I received messages from people who had paid to participate and were now demanding a refund because the event had been canceled. Apparently, Mateo had not obtained the necessary permit to use the place that he had announced, and when the organizers of the space discovered his history, they refused to allow him to continue forward. His parents were furious. Not only had he ruined another opportunity to redeem himself, but he had also used the family money to cover the initial costs of the tournament, promising that he would return it once he obtained profit. Obviously, that never happened. That night, Mateo had his final confrontation with my dad. "This is unacceptable, Mateo," my father told him with a voice firmer than I had heard in years. "We gave you all the possible opportunities to fix your mistakes, and the only thing that you have done is to create more problems." "And what did you expect me to do?" responded Mateo, almost screaming. "I have never had the support that you give to Olivia. She has always been the favorite." "Enough with that," exploded my dad. "Your life is like that because you made it like that. Olivia worked hard to get where she is, while you have spent years blaming others for your own decisions. We are not going to tolerate it anymore. You have 2 weeks to find another place to live." Mateo tried to argue, but my dad did not give him another opportunity. For the first time, my parents were completely firm in their decision. While Mateo was packing his things during the following weeks, he still tried to manipulate who he could. It was then when he made his last desperate attempt to drag me into his chaos. One night while I was in my room studying, I received a text message from an unknown number. When I opened it, it was a screenshot of a supposed email of mine in which admitted having created the publications that ruined his business. The message said something like, "If you do not come and help me fix this, I am going to send this to all your contacts." I was left frozen. At first, Mateo had created a false confession, and now he was trying to blackmail me. But quickly I calmed down. I knew exactly how to handle this. The next day we will. Let's make sure I kept copies of everything to have proof in case Mateo tried to take this further. That same night, I confronted him for the last time. "Diverdad, do you think that you can continue manipulating everyone, Mateo? Nobody trusts in you. It is time for you to grow up and start facing the consequences of your actions." Mateo did not respond. He simply looked at me with hate and returned to his room. Finally, Mateo moved out of the house a few weeks later. Nobody knows exactly where he is now. According to some acquaintances, he is living with a friend in another state, trying to start over. My parents are relieved that he has finally left their lives, although they still hope that one day he can change. As for me, I have learned not to let Mateo affect me anymore. His last attempt at blackmail was the definitive proof that he will never change, and now I am focused on continuing forward with my own life away from his drama. I do not know if he will ever reappear, but if he does, I will be ready.
Story 2. My mother kicked me out of the house for her new family. Years later, upon discovering that I was stable, she returned demanding that I pay for my siblings' college and assaulted me when I refused. My mother had me when she was 21 years old, and my biological father was never present. Since I was little, she told me that he never wanted children, and since they were only together for a few months when she became pregnant, she gave him the option of leaving the relationship, and he accepted without hesitation. According to her, the separation was bitter, so she decided not to ask for child support, and he did not offer either. It was a convenient agreement for both. Fortunately, my grandparents were always very present and helped my mother move on with her life. Thanks to them, she was able to finish her studies and get a job. During my childhood, she had a few relationships, but no one really stayed until, when I was about 9 years old, she started dating Carlos. He was a co-worker of hers, and they dated for a few years before getting married. Carlos and I got along, but we were not particularly close. It was like living with a roommate who does not hate you. He was not the abusive or bad stepfather type, but he did not make an effort to create a bond with me either. Everything seemed to be going well until, for years after the marriage, my mother became pregnant again, this time with twins. Everyone was very excited, including me. Thinking about it, I should have realized what was about to happen, but I was so focused on believing that my mother would always be by my side no matter what that I ignored the signs. She had gone through many difficulties raising me alone, so it did not make sense to think she would abandon me after so much effort, right? However, shortly after the twins were born, the relationship between my mother and me began to change. She became more distant and seemed increasingly irritated by my presence. I thought it was temporary, perhaps caused by the exhaustion of caring for babies, so I decided to give her space. Despite that, I still tried to help whenever I could, but she treated me like I was a nuisance. The bomb dropped 6 months after the twins were born. They called me for a serious conversation and told me that now that they had 2 young children to care for, they could not continue keeping me in the house. I had just turned 16. Although I was still a minor and technically they could not kick me out, they used a soft approach, saying that finances were tight and that it would be difficult to support such a large family. I found it curious because my mother and Carlos were software developers, and we had never had financial problems before. Our standard of living had always been comfortable, so I knew they were lying. They wanted me gone. I tried to suggest solutions, like getting a part-time job to help with expenses, but my mother said she wanted to save resources for the children who deserved it more. Yes, she used those words, who deserved it more than me. It was at that moment that I realized there was no place for me in that house. They did not even bother to suggest where I should go. They just pushed me out. Too proud to argue, I packed my bags and went to my grandparents' house that same night. After leaving my mother's house, I was taken in by my grandparents. They were outraged by what my mother and Carlos had done, but they did not completely break off the relationship with her because they wanted to maintain contact with the twins. Despite supporting me emotionally, my grandparents were already aging and could not take care of all my expenses. So, at 16, I started working part-time to help with the bills. Although I saw my mother and Carlos occasionally, when they visited my grandparents with the twins, it was as if I were invisible to them. They rarely asked about me, and when we met, the interactions were cold and formal. It was obvious that my absence did not affect them. In fact, they seemed happier without me. Seeing that hurt me deeply, but I kept my pride and moved on. When it was time to go to college, I knew I could not count on their help. My grandparents did not have the means to support me financially, so I turned to an uncle who offered to be the co-signer for my student loan. My mother and Carlos refused, claiming the same reason as always: they wanted to save resources for the twins. Still, I managed to get into college. I had to work while studying to cover expenses and avoid accumulating debt. It was not easy, but somehow I managed to balance work and studies. During that time, I had no contact with my mother, not even at my graduation, where only my grandparents were present to congratulate me. My mother did not even bother to send me a message. After graduating, I started working immediately, but life was not easy. My starting salary barely covered rent, bills, and food. Still, I managed to start paying off my student loans. Every penny counted. There was no money left over for luxuries or emergencies, but I never asked anyone for anything. I had learned to manage on my own, even if it meant sacrificing my health and comfort. The first few years were tough, but over time, I began to build my career. I worked hard, accepted difficult tasks, and dedicated myself more than anyone else in the office. Finally, all that effort began to pay off. After years of struggle, I was promoted to a management position in my company. It was a huge achievement, something I never imagined achieving so early in my life. I decided to keep my promotion a secret, telling only a few close people, including the uncle who had co-signed my loan. I wanted to thank him for believing in me and helping me when no one else was willing. Unfortunately, that was the turning point. During a family gathering, he mentioned my promotion to my mother. He thought he was doing something good, but it ended up creating a disaster. A few weeks later, my mother and Carlos showed up at my door unannounced. I had blocked my mother on all social media and even changed my phone number to avoid any contact with her. I never imagined she would show up in person. When I opened the door, I was surprised to see them there, but I naively let them in. For a moment, I thought that maybe they were there to apologize or try to mend the past. How wrong I was. As soon as they sat down, they started talking about my promotion and how proud they were of me. It sounded so fake after years of not showing the slightest interest in my life. Now they were interested in my career. That was when they revealed the real reason for their visit. Carlos had lost his job, and the business they tried to open had failed. They were in serious financial trouble, and with the twins approaching college age, they desperately needed money to pay for their studies. The conversation soon turned into a request, or rather a demand, that I cover the college expenses of my half-siblings. They argued that I had an obligation to help, considering that my mother had raised me alone for much of my childhood. When I refused, saying that I was not responsible for the twins, things got out of control. My mother started accusing me of being ungrateful and selfish, while Carlos simply backed her up, nodding to everything she said. It was at that moment that I realized that they were not there to reconnect with me. They were only there because they needed something. My mother went so far as to say that I should repay all the sacrifice she made to raise me. That was the last straw for me. I lost control, and for the first time, I let out everything I had been keeping in for years. I exploded. I could not contain myself. I told them, unfiltered, everything I had been holding back since they kicked me out of the house. I reproached them that because of their decision to prioritize the twins, I had to work for my teenage years, give up a normal life, and face difficulties that could have been avoided if my mother and Carlos had acted like the responsible parents they now pretended to be. I reminded my mother that while I was struggling to survive, she and Carlos were spending the saved money on trips and luxurious gifts for the twins, as if they wanted to erase my existence. I asked them how they had the nerve to show up at my house and ask me for something after having completely ignored me for years. It was as if all the pain I had carried exploded into words I did not even know I had inside. My mother tried to reverse the situation, saying that I was being dramatic and that she had always done the best for everyone. That was when she said something that left me incredulous. You should be grateful that I raised you alone for so long. I sacrificed everything for you, and I only asked for one thing in return, and you cannot even do that for me. That was like receiving a slap in the face. I tried to stay calm, but it was impossible. I looked at her and said, with all the clarity I could muster, you did not do that for me. You raised me because it was your obligation as a mother. That was not a favor. It was the least you could do. Carlos, who had been quiet up to that point, decided to intervene. He started talking about how things had become difficult for them and how I, now with a comfortable life, could easily help. He even tried to make me feel guilty by saying that if I did not help, I would be harming the twins' future. That was when I understood it. To them, I was never a person. I was just a disposable resource, someone they could use when they needed to. I interrupted them mid-sentence. If you cannot afford the twins' college, use the money you saved when you kicked me out of the house. Remember all that sacrifice you made to prioritize the children who deserved it more? Well, now is the time to reap the rewards of that decision. My mother completely lost her composure. She started yelling, saying that I was an ungrateful, selfish person and that I was worthless. She said she expected more from me, especially after everything she did for me. The irony was almost comical. She still had the nerve to act like she was the victim. I calmly asked them to leave my house, but my mother continued to insist that I should help. She started raising her voice, saying that I was wasting the opportunity to be a good person. When I saw that they were not going to leave on their own, I lost my patience and threatened to call the police. That finally made them get up and leave, but not before hearing my mother say, "You are making the biggest mistake of your life. You will regret turning your back on your family." When they closed the door, I felt a mixture of relief and exhaustion. Years of resentment and pain had surfaced, but I knew they would not give up so easily, and I was right. A few days later, my mother started sending me endless emails detailing everything she had done for me throughout my life. Each email seemed like a desperate attempt to manipulate me emotionally. It was as if she was trying to convince me that I had an eternal debt to her. At first, I ignored them, deleting the emails without even reading them. But after a few days, I decided to respond to one of them. I wrote exactly what I thought. "You did nothing for me beyond what was your obligation as a mother. I will not feel guilty for your decisions. You made your own decisions when you kicked me out of the house. I owe you nothing." As expected, my response was not well received. My mother replied by calling me ungrateful and saying that I had no idea how much she had sacrificed for me. Then I blocked her email. She tried to create another account, but I did the same. I repeated the process until I realized that I needed a more definitive solution. Meanwhile, my grandparents tried to intervene. They talked to my mother and told her that she was wrong, but as always, she refused to listen. They also supported me, saying that they completely understood my decision not to help and that they would do everything possible to keep my mother away from me. That was comforting, but I knew the battle was far from over. A few days after I blocked my mother's emails, I thought things would finally calm down, but no, she was just getting started. One day, while I was at home, I received a call from the office. It was the receptionist informing me that my mother had shown up at the office demanding to speak with me. I was stunned. Not only had she shown up at my work, but she was causing a scene, refusing to leave. I spoke with the receptionist and asked her to tell my mother that I was not there, which was true that day, since I had taken the day off because I was not feeling well. When the receptionist put me on the phone with my mother, I tried to remain calm, but I made it clear that if she continued with this behavior, I would not hesitate to take legal action. I told her that I was ready to sue her for invasion of privacy and even for harassment if necessary. My mother seemed to hesitate for a moment, but soon returned to her manipulative speech, saying that I was exaggerating and that a mother has the right to see her daughter. I replied that she had no right over me, especially after all the years of neglect and abandonment. She tried to counterattack, saying that she was only there because she wanted to talk and resolve things, but it was obvious that she had ulterior motives. Finally, after much insistence, she left my work, but that episode left me on alert. I talked to some close colleagues, and even with my boss, briefly explaining the situation. Fortunately, everyone was very understanding and said they would do everything possible to protect me if something similar happened again. Still, I knew I needed to do something more concrete to prevent this type of behavior. I decided to consult a lawyer to understand my options. I was not sure if what she was doing was reason enough to request a restraining order, but I wanted to explore all possibilities. The lawyer explained that although there had been no direct threats so far, her behavior could be considered harassment if it continued. He recommended that I start documenting everything, from the emails to the unexpected visits. Apparently, my mother realized that showing up at my work was not going to work, so she decided to try something even more daring. A few days later, when I returned home from work, there she was, standing in front of my door. Before I could say anything, she started yelling that I was an ungrateful daughter and that I was destroying the family. I tried to ignore her and walk past, but suddenly, she lunged at me. It was so fast that I could barely react. My mother pushed me, knocking me to the ground while yelling things like, "You own me," and "You ruined my life." I was absolutely in shock. This was the same woman I called mother. Luckily, my neighbors heard the commotion and came running out. One of them managed to pull my mother away from me while another called the police. I, still shaking, took my phone to record what was happening in case I needed proof. My mother was out of control, screaming and trying to break free while blaming me and the world for all the difficulties she faced. When the police arrived, I explained the situation and, without hesitation, decided to file a complaint against her. My mother was taken away by the officers, and it was then that I realized how far things had gone. It was no longer just about asking for help for the twins. She was so consumed by anger and resentment that she seemed unable to see how irrational she was being. After that, I spoke again with my lawyer, who helped me apply for a restraining order against her. Fortunately, I was able to present enough evidence, and the fact that she had physically attacked me made everything even easier to prove. Meanwhile, I learned through my grandparents that Carlos and the twins had left their house. It seems that even he realized that the situation was completely out of control. Carlos apparently tried to reason with my mother after getting her out of the police station. He made it clear that he no longer wanted to be part of that chaos, mainly for the sake of the twins. According to my grandparents, he went to his own parents' house with the children and said that he would not return until my mother got her head on straight. My mother, of course, did not take it well. She started blaming everyone around her, including her own parents, for her situation. My grandparents, who had always tried to maintain minimal contact with her for the twins, were starting to lose their patience. They told me that despite everything, they were willing to cut ties with her if she continued with this behavior. Despite all this, I finally felt like I was regaining control. With the restraining order in place and the support of my neighbors and friends, I knew I was protected. But at the same time, it was sad to see how far my mother had come and how the relationship between us had been completely destroyed. After getting the restraining order, I thought my mother would finally back off, but as expected, that did not happen immediately. A few days after the incident in front of my house, I received news that she was trying to defame me with relatives and mutual friends. She was spreading the narrative that I was an ungrateful daughter who left my mother in misery and was refusing to help my own siblings. Honestly, I already expected that kind of behavior. It did not surprise me, but it still hurt to know that she was trying to tarnish my image. Fortunately, most of the people close to me knew the truth. My grandparents were the first to support me, telling everyone that my mother was being irrational. Even some distant relatives who would normally have remained neutral said they understood my position. However, the real relief came when Carlos, whom I always thought of as a simple accomplice in all of this, took an unexpected position. He contacted my grandparents and said that he did not agree with what my mother was doing. He admitted that their financial difficulties were real, but also acknowledged that my mother was being unfair and selfish by trying to manipulate me and involve me in problems that they themselves had created. Carlos revealed that he was trying to distance himself from my mother, both because of the constant arguments and because of the impact her behavior was having on the twins. He also explained that since moving in with his parents, he was seeking help to start over with his children without depending on my mother's emotional instability. I am not going to lie, it was strange to hear that from Carlos. During all those years, I saw him as someone passive who simply followed what my mother said. Maybe he had changed. Maybe he simply reached his limit. Either way, it did not matter. I no longer had any interest in rebuilding a relationship with either of them. A few days later, my mother tried again to show up at my house, despite the restraining order in effect. This time, the police were called immediately, and she received a formal warning. Only after that did she start to back off. Despite everything, it seemed that something had finally broken inside her. She stopped trying to contact me directly, but continued sending messages to my grandparents, blaming them for not controlling the situation. They were exhausted, and for the first time, they talked about cutting ties with her definitively. Meanwhile, I began to reorganize my life. I decided to move to a bigger house, something that was already in my plans before all this happened. The moving process helped me clear my mind and finally feel in control of the situation. My lawyer also advised me on how to protect my new residence to prevent my mother from having any kind of access. It was a new beginning, and I wanted to do everything right this time. Although it was a relief to see my mother start to back off, it was also sad not for the lost relationship that was already dead years ago, but for the realization that she never really cared about me. From the moment she chose to kick me out of the house to prioritize the twins, it was clear that I was just an obligation to her. And now, seeing how far she was willing to go to try to manipulate and extort me was an emotional weight I did not expect to carry. Today, I finally feel like I have found closure. I no longer expect an apology, nor do I have any hope of reconciliation. I have accepted that my mother is who she is and that the best thing for my mental health is to keep my distance. The twins, unfortunately, are also part of that past that I prefer to leave behind. I do not see them as guilty, but I am not responsible for them, and I never will be. My grandparents, who have always been on my side, continue to be my greatest support. They also decided that it was time to prioritize their own peace by limiting contact with my mother. As for the rest of the family, many now understand what I went through and have offered their support, although some still believe the distorted version of the story that my mother tells. However, that no longer bothers me. As for my mother, from what I have heard recently, she continues to face difficulties. Carlos and the twins have not yet returned home, and it seems that she is increasingly isolated. I know many people would expect me to feel guilty, but I honestly do not. She made her decisions and is now facing the consequences of them. I, on the other hand, have moved on and am living a life that I built alone, without anyone's help. Finally, all this taught me something important. Family is not always defined by blood. For me, my true family are those who supported me in the most difficult times, like my grandparents and my uncle. Those are the people I am going to keep close. That is all. Thank you for reading this far. I felt I needed to get all of this off my chest. Sometimes I wonder if I am wrong for cutting my mother out of my life, but every time I remember everything I went through, I am certain that I made the right decision. Final update. Some relatives recently saw my mother, and it seems that her situation is getting worse. She still tries to blame me, but no one else seems willing to listen to her. For my part, I am ready to leave this story in the past and focus on my future. Story 1. My parents secretly brought my brother to my wedding. So, I revealed during a speech that he had an affair with my ex, now his pregnant wife. She asked for a divorce. Hello everyone. It is a bit surreal to be writing this, but I honestly need opinions. I, Lucas, 31M, married the love of my life, Clara, 27F, a week ago. It was a beautiful day filled with love, friends, and family. But, like everything in my life, it could not pass without a bit of chaos because of something my parents decided to do behind my back. My brother, Daniel, 33M, will probably face a divorce, and now my family is attacking me day and night, telling me that I need to fix things. I sincerely do not think I have done anything wrong. So, I came here to hear what you have to say. To give some context, my relationship with Daniel is completely destroyed. It was not always like this. When we were younger, we had a normal sibling bond. We fought like any children, but I always knew that deep down he would take care of me, and I would take care of him. My parents always strive to instill the value of family above all else, and I really tried to honor that. The problem is that apparently, that value only made sense to me. It all started 6 years ago when I started dating a girl named Laura, now 31F. I was obsessed with her. She was beautiful, intelligent, funny. She seemed perfect. We were part of the same group of friends. When we started dating, I felt like my life was complete. But, deep down, she was a toxic person. My world became chaos from the moment we got involved. She loved fights and lived for drama, and I was always someone who ran away from conflicts. Despite all the red flags, I was in love and ignored everything until, months later, I discovered that she was cheating on me with someone from work. It was by chance that I discovered it, and my heart broke into pieces. When I confronted her, she denied it until she could not anymore, and finally admitted it. She begged for forgiveness, said she had made a mistake, and would do anything to regain my trust. Against all good judgment, I gave her another chance. I believed that maybe she could change, even though I knew that whoever cheats once, cheats always. During the first few months, it seemed like everything was fine, but gradually, the same strange behaviors started to appear. I knew something was wrong, but I did not want to believe that she could cheat on me again. I started to rationalize everything in my head, trying to convince myself that I was exaggerating until one day I decided to check her cell phone. I do not like the person I was at that moment, invading her privacy. It showed how broken the trust already was, but somehow, it was a relief because what I discovered confirmed all my fears. Laura was cheating on me again. And with whom? With Daniel, my own brother. I had never felt so much pain in my whole life. Reading the messages between them was like receiving a punch in the stomach. The people I trusted the most betrayed me in the cruelest way possible. At that moment, Laura entered the room and saw that I had her cell phone. She started yelling, saying I was invading her privacy, but I just pointed to the screen. I threw the cell phone against the wall and left the house. I walked for hours, trying to process what I had just discovered. I received some calls from her, but I ignored them all. When she realized that I would not answer, she had Daniel call me. He left me some messages saying we needed to talk and that it was not what it seemed. But sincerely, what else could he say? The messages were crystal clear. The next day, I sent a message to Laura telling her that she could pick up her things. She tried to call me several times, but I ignored her. A few days later, she picked up everything and left without making a fuss, at least that time. As for Daniel, he simply disappeared from my life. He did not try to justify himself beyond those initial messages. A week later, I told my parents everything. They were surprised, of course, and to my relief, initially took my side. They reprimanded Daniel and said they understood if I did not want to see him again. But, over time, I realized they could not deal with the fact that the perfect family was destroyed. This became increasingly evident after the initial impact. My parents began to give signs that they wanted me to leave the past behind. They repeated that family is everything and that Daniel deserved a second chance. But for me, that was impossible. It was not just about Laura, but about the betrayal of my own brother. He knew how I felt about her, and still, he did what he did. That was not something I could overcome. As the months passed, my parents tried to make reconciliation seem inevitable. My mother would drop subtle comments like, "Daniel misses you," or "Maybe someday you can talk." I cut the subject every time it came up. My father, on the other hand, remained silent. I think he knew that any attempt to convince me would only make things worse. That was when I started therapy. I needed to deal with the anger and resentment, not only towards Daniel and Laura, but also for the constant pressure from my mother. In the process, I realized how toxic Laura had been and that deep down, Daniel had done me a favor by getting me out of that relationship. Of course, that did not justify what he did, but it helped me see that my life could be much better without her. 2 years later, I met Clara. She was completely different from Laura. Clara was calm, kind, and made me feel at peace, something I had never experienced before. We connected quickly, and in a short time, we were already dating. For the first time, I was in a healthy, drama-free relationship. For a long time, I did not tell my family about Clara. I was afraid of how my mother would react, especially because of Daniel. After everything that had happened, I knew that introducing Clara to them would mean opening a new chapter for them to try to pressure me again about rebuilding the family. So, I kept the relationship a secret until we were sure we wanted to get married. When I finally told my family, they were thrilled. Clara quickly won them over with her sweet personality, and my parents seemed genuinely happy for me. But as always, my mother found a way to ruin the moment. During the dinner where we announced our engagement, she said, "Now that you are happy and have moved on, you can finally reconcile with Daniel. Let us be a real family again." That took me by surprise. I took a deep breath and tried to explain once again that the problem was not Laura or the time that had passed, but Daniel's betrayal. I told them that no matter how much time passed, I would never forgive him. My mother became enraged, saying that I was being stubborn and immature. My father, as always, tried to calm things down, asking my mother to drop the subject. Clara, who had been quiet up to that point, finally spoke. She said, "I think Lucas is more than capable of deciding how to handle this. He has the right to set his boundaries." That temporarily silenced my mother, but I could see on her face that she was far from accepting the situation. After that dinner, things became tense between my mother and me. She stopped talking openly about Daniel, but I felt she was plotting something. Despite that, life went on, and Clara and I began preparations for the wedding. My mother seemed involved and even apologized for having pressured me so much. She assured me that she would respect my boundaries from now on. For a while, I believed her. Clara, optimistic as always, said that my mother just wanted everyone to be happy. But deep down, I knew she would not give up so easily. Still, I tried to focus on the wedding and ignore my suspicions. The big day arrived. Everything was perfect. My friends were there. Clara was radiant in her wedding dress, and I could hardly believe I was marrying the woman of my dreams. Until, shortly before the ceremony began, my best friend and best man, Raphael, 32M, came running towards me with a worried expression. "Lucas, we have a problem," he said. My stomach dropped. I asked him what was going on, and he told me that my parents had arrived with Daniel and his pregnant wife, Mariana. At that moment, I felt as if all the air had been sucked out of my body. It was not enough with all the history between us. Now they also brought his pregnant wife, clearly trying to get attention. Raphael said he tried to make them leave, but my mother insisted, saying that Daniel was my true brother and that family should always be present at important moments. I was furious. I immediately called my father, demanding an explanation. He tried to calm me down, saying it was for the good of the family and that it would not hurt to pretend for a few hours. My response was short and direct. Today is my wedding, and you ruined it. My head was spinning. I could not believe that my parents had disrespected what mattered most to me. What irritated me the most was that they acted as if they were doing something noble, as if they were saving the family. I called my mother, and she started with the same speech as always. Lucas, he is your brother. Life is too short to hold a grudge. I remained silent for a few seconds, trying to control myself. When I finally spoke, I said, if life is so short, why are you wasting my wedding by forcing me to accept something I made clear I do not want? I told them not to bring Daniel. Not only did they ignore that, but they also planned everything behind my back. You do not respect anything I say. My mother tried to justify herself by saying she did it for the greater good and that I needed to be the more mature brother. I lost my patience and hung up. Raphael stayed by my side, waiting for me to make a decision. I knew I was about to explode and cause a scandal, but I also understood that it would not solve anything. It was then that he suggested an idea that at first seemed crazy, but it made sense. If they think it is all about the family image, let us destroy that image in front of everyone. The idea was simple and brutal. Make a toast, not just any toast, but one that exposed everything: my brother, my ex, my parents, all the drama. Initially, I hesitated. After all, it was my wedding, and I did not want to turn the happiest day of my life into a circus. But at the same time, I knew that I needed to set a definitive boundary. They could not get away with this. I talked to Clara about what Raphael had suggested. She was silent for a moment, processing everything. When she finally answered, she said something that surprised me. Lucas, if that is what you need to do to free yourself from this situation, I am with you. This is our day, and they ruined it. Do what you have to do. That gave me the strength I needed. The ceremony continued without incident. Daniel and my mother remained discreet, probably thinking they would get away with it. After the ceremony, it was time for the toasts. Some people gave beautiful speeches, including Raphael, who opened the toast session. Then it was my turn. I stood up with my glass in hand and said, I want to take this moment to make a very special toast, not only to my wonderful wife, Clara, who is the best thing that has happened to me in my life, but also to my brother, Daniel. The room fell silent. I saw the color drain from my parents' faces. Daniel looked at me, but did not say anything. His wife, Mariana, looked confused, clearly not knowing what was about to come. I continued, Daniel, thank you. Thank you for being the brother who always knew how to challenge me, even if that meant destroying my trust. Because if it were not for you, I would have never met Clara. It is thanks to your betrayal with Laura, my ex, that I was able to get out of a toxic relationship, rebuild myself, and find true love. The silence in the room was deafening. People were shocked. Mariana turned pale, and Daniel simply stared at the floor. I continued, addressing my parents. And of course, I also want to thank my parents, who, despite knowing all this, decided to bring Daniel here today without telling me, because the family image was more important than my feelings. Thank you for reminding me what really matters to you. My mother started to cry. My father stared into space, completely uncomfortable. Raphael, Clara, and I remained silent, letting the weight of my words sink in. It was Mariana who broke the silence. She stood up, looked at Daniel, and said, This is what you have been hiding from me all this time. Without waiting for an answer, she politely apologized to the guests and left the room. Daniel went after her, but she ignored him. After they left, my parents remained motionless for a few minutes. My mother could barely look at me. She mumbled something about needing to leave and walked out, with my father right behind. Finally, the weight I had carried for years began to disappear. I knew I had caused a scene, but for the first time, I felt like I had stood up for myself. The party continued. Most of the guests tried to ignore what had just happened, but Raphael and Clara were by my side, supporting me. I knew there would still be consequences, but at that moment, I just wanted to enjoy what was left of my wedding. The day after the wedding, I woke up with my cell phone full of messages and missed calls. Most were from my mother. The messages ranged from furious accusations to pathetic attempts at emotional manipulation, like, "How could you do this to our family? You ruined everything. Your brother is destroyed, and it is your fault." She also tried to involve Clara, saying that I was dragging my wife into the mud by refusing to resolve things. Clara, for her part, was dealing with her own problems. My mother was also sending her messages, changing tactics, now telling her that Clara had a duty to help me reconcile the family. Clara, being the wonderful person that she is, tried to ignore it as much as possible, but it became clear that it was all starting to affect her. I asked her to block my mother, but every time she did, my mother got a new number or created another Instagram account to keep sending messages. While dealing with this, I received a call I did not expect. It was Mariana, Daniel's wife. At first, I hesitated to answer. After all, I did not know what she wanted or if she was trying to defend Daniel. But her voice on the phone was different. She was crying and asked me, almost begging, to tell her my version of the story. She said that Daniel had told her a completely different version and that she needed to know the truth, especially since she was about to have the baby. Clara encouraged me to listen to Mariana. She said that Mariana was not to blame for anything and that if she was willing to listen, I should tell her the truth. I agreed, and we arranged to meet at a coffee shop. When Mariana arrived, she looked exhausted. Her pregnancy was evident, but the emotional fatigue was even worse. As soon as we sat down, she started talking. She said that since the wedding, Daniel had been completely beside himself, trying to justify what happened. According to him, Laura and I were just friends, and when she fell in love with him, I could not handle it and cut contact with both of them. He said he tried to approach me several times, but that I was too immature to get over it. When I heard that, I was in shock. I did not know whether to laugh or be even more enraged. I told Mariana that it was all an absolute lie, and I began to tell her everything from the beginning: how I dated Laura, how I discovered the betrayal, how Daniel knew how much I loved her and still decided to betray me. I told her how my parents tried to cover it all up for the sake of the family, and how at the wedding they crossed all the lines by bringing Daniel without my consent. Mariana remained silent while I spoke. When I finished, she looked devastated. "So it is true," she said, almost in a whisper. I asked her what she meant, and she explained that even before the wedding, she felt that something was not right. Daniel always avoided talking about me and about what had happened. When she asked my parents, they always said it was something from the past and that it did not matter anymore. She started to connect the dots and realized that there was something much bigger behind it. It was then that she said something that made me uncomfortable. My mother had pressured both of them to attend the wedding. Mariana did not want to go, especially because she knew that the relationship between Daniel and me was terrible. But my mother insisted, saying that it was the perfect time for reconciliation because with the baby on the way, the family needed to be united. Mariana believed it, thinking that maybe I had given some sign that I was willing to try. When I heard that, I felt a mixture of pity and rage: pity for Mariana, who had clearly been manipulated, and rage at my parents, who had orchestrated everything without caring about anyone's feelings. Mariana looked heartbroken and said, "I should never have gone. I thought I was doing something good for our baby, but I only caused more problems." I told her it was not her fault and that she had the right to know the truth, especially since she was about to bring a new life into the world. Mariana was silent for a moment and then said, almost in tears, "I am going to ask for a divorce. I cannot stay with someone who lies like that, especially about something so important. He destroyed you, and now he is trying to destroy me." I knew she was serious, but it still took me by surprise. I did not know what to say, so I just offered my support. I told her that if she needed anything, Clara and I would be there to help her, especially for the baby. She thanked me, but said she would need time to process everything. When she left, I told Clara everything. She, as always, supported me and told me that I had done the right thing by telling her the truth. But we also knew that this was not the end. Mariana's decision to ask for a divorce was going to further fuel the conflict with my family. In the days that followed, the situation escalated rapidly. I received a call from my father, something that was already rare. He seemed dejected, almost resigned, and said, "Lucas, I am just calling to let you know that Mariana filed for divorce. I am not blaming you for this, but your brother is destroyed." For the first time, I felt that my father was not trying to manipulate me, just sharing the consequences. Still, he asked me to stay away to avoid further conflict. I answered dryly, I was already away until you decided to bring him to my wedding. My mother, on the other hand, was furious. She tried to call me several times, but I continued to ignore her. When she realized that I was not going to answer, she started sending even more aggressive messages, saying things like, you destroyed your brother's marriage. You ruined our family. And of course, the old emotional card. After all we did for you, this is how you treat us? I knew responding would be useless, but I still sent a single message. It was not my betrayal that destroyed his marriage. That is Daniel's fault, and you know it. You chose to disrespect my boundaries at my own wedding. The consequences are yours, not mine. My mother, of course, did not stop there. She tried again to attack Clara, sending her messages and even creating new social media accounts. When Clara blocked one, another one appeared the next day. This was starting to wear down my wife. This incredible woman who always supported me was now suffering because of something she was never involved in. We had a meeting at home to talk about this. Clara said she was tired and that she believed we needed to cut contact completely. I agreed and decided to change my phone number. Clara did the same. We also reinforced our social media accounts to prevent my mother from continuing to harass us. For the first time in years, I felt we could breathe. Meanwhile, the situation with Daniel worsened. According to my father, he was in a deplorable state. Mariana had left him, and she was already organizing to raise the baby alone. Daniel tried to contact me, but as I had already blocked all means, he did not succeed. My father told me that Daniel wanted to apologize, but I did not believe him. He had 6 years to do it and only tried when he lost everything. Despite that, I could not feel sorry for him. He made terrible decisions, and now he was facing the consequences. He betrayed his own brother. He lied to his wife. In the end, he ruined his own marriage. What else could he expect? A few weeks later, I received another unexpected message, this time from Mariana. She wanted to thank me for being honest with her and informed me that she had already formalized the divorce. She said she knew that raising a baby alone would not be easy, but it was better than living a lie with someone like Daniel. I asked her if she needed anything, and she replied that she just needed time and space. Clara and I agreed to help her if she changed her mind, but we respected her decision to go it alone. As for my parents, their silence did not last long. My mother eventually found another way to contact me, this time through distant relatives. They started calling me, saying things like, you know your mother only wants the best for the family, or he is your brother, Lucas, and you should help him in this difficult time. I remained firm and explained my position to everyone who tried to interfere. Most understood, but some still insisted that family is above all else. For me, that concept no longer meant anything. Eventually, my father tried to resume contact in a more rational way. He wanted to talk and try to remedy things. He said he understood that Daniel had made a mistake, but that in the end, he was still my brother and that at some point, I would need to take the first step to rebuild the relationship. My response was, Clara and I already took the first step. It was when I cut contact with him years ago. You chose to force a reconciliation on the most important day of my life. Now you have to deal with the consequences. After that conversation, my father seemed to give up trying to convince me. My mother, however, continued on her mission to fix the family. But over time, even she began to diminish her attempts. Blocking her and walking away completely was difficult at first, but it ended up being liberating. Today, Clara and I are doing well. Mariana had the baby and sent us a quick message to let us know. Clara and I sent her a gift and made it clear that we would be available if she needed us. I do not maintain contact with my parents or Daniel, and that has been essential to preserving my mental health. I feel no guilt for what happened at the wedding. In fact, that toast was the liberation I needed after years of swallowing the betrayal and manipulations of my family. Daniel deserved everything that happened, and my mother needed to understand that she could not control everything in the name of her perfect image. Clara always says it was the happiest day of her life, despite all the drama. It still feels that way. As for me, I finally feel like I am at peace. And that, for me, is worth more than anything else.